Of course, I came to save you. However, how did you know I was coming to save you? Ling Chen said confidently, without reacting at all. As he spoke, he remembered the voice he had heard when he had just entered the dark world. Are you here to save me? Could it have come from this girl? However, that voice evidently wasn't a girl's voice. The girl smiled cheerfully. She lifted her skirt as she lightly stood up. She was barely up to Ling Chen's ribs, and she tilted her head back as she looked up, saying earnestly, Because I knew. Wah! Ling Chen, you're so tall. You're so much taller than me. The girl shouted out something that was completely unrelated to what Ling Chen was asking. She lifted up her arms and stood on her toes, but was still far from how tall Ling Chen was. When you grow up, you'll become taller as well, Ling Chen said as he smiled. Grow up? How can I grow up? The girl asked in curiosity as she looked at Ling Chen expectantly, waiting for his reply. She stood incredibly close to Ling Chen, less than half a body space away from him, so close that Ling Chen could easily pull her into his embrace. Her words, actions, and expressions made her seem quite intimate with Ling Chen, and did not seem like a stranger at all, nor did she suspect that Ling Chen could be a bad person. Perhaps within her pure mindset, there was no such thing as a bad person. You don't have to do anything. You'll grow bit by bit every day. After a year, you might be this tall. Ling Chen motioned with his hands. After another year, you'll probably be around here. After 7 or 8 years, you'll be quite tall. Eh? The girl's mouth parted as a strange light appeared in her eyes, and she smiled. I can grow taller after a few years? Hee hee. Since Ling Chen said it, I'll definitely grow bit by bit. Ling Chen was quite amused, hearing her words. People grew naturally day by day. This was common sense. Of course, that was only to humans. Sha, apart from your name, as well as knowing that I'd come to save you, do you really not know anything else? Ling Chen asked seriously. I don't remember anything else, the girl said as she smiled. It was as if she didn't mind that she didn't know anything except her name. Then, Ling Chen felt like smashing the ground. He had thought he finally found a way out, but it turned out that this ridiculously beautiful girl knew nothing. He thought for a moment, then asked, Sha, do you know how long you've been here? I don't know, the girl replied with her ethereal voice incredibly decisively. It wasn't that she didn't know, but that there was no way of knowing. Without anything to serve as a reference, it was impossible to tell how much time had passed. Then have you been here the whole time without leaving? Yep. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't. Afterwards, Big Brother Ling Chen came to save me. The girl's smile became even brighter. What did you do by yourself then? Sleep. And apart from sleeping? Oh, when I'm not sleeping, I'm waiting for Ling Chen to come save me. Ling Chen was sure that even if he spoke with her for 3 days and 3 nights, he would not be able to obtain any useful information from her. He scratched his head as he looked at the lunar scourge. He suddenly thought of something and showed the girl his right wrist. Sha, do you know what this is? Ling Chen had entered the dark world and come to the crystal ball, within which the girl resided, because of the lunar scourge. The lunar scourge had brought him to this girl, and the girl had confidently told him that she knew he would come and save her. Could it be that there was some sort of connection between this girl and the lunar scourge? The girl's gaze fell on the lunar scourge. After looking at it for a while, she leaned forwards to take a closer look. She raised her eyebrows as her lips opened and closed, and she slowly spoke. Lunar scourge. Ling Chen felt quite excited as he hurriedly asked, Sha, have you seen it before? Nope, Chadisika said as she shook her head. Why does Ling Chen say that? You haven't? Ling Chen frowned. Then how do you know its name? Its name, eh? Is Lunar Scourge its name? What a strange name. Look, Ling Chen, its name is carved here. You can see it if you look closely. The girl stretched out a snow-white finger as she pointed at the words Lunar Scourge carved on the edges. Ling Chen almost smacked himself in the head. So she had been reading the words engraved on the Lunar Scourge. Ling Chen. The girl looked up at him. With how tall she was, she could only fully tilt back her head. Otherwise, she could only see his chest. Since you found me, why don't you take me away from here? I don't like this place. So Ling Chen, can you take me away from here as soon as possible? All right, but how do I take you away from here? The desire in the girl's voice caused his heart to tremble. This girl's looks were simply too enchanting. Even if she were an evil demon, he wouldn't be able to refuse her. Ling Chen looked around him, but could only see mist. He had no idea how to exit from there. It's very simple. The girl stretched out her white and tender hand. You just need to hold my hand and walk forwards. If you keep walking and walking, you'll be able to talk me away from here. It's true. Hold her hand. Keep walking. Was it that simple? This. Ling Chen could only nod and agree, then hold the girl's outstretched little hand. Immediately, an incredibly soft and supple feeling was transmitted from his palm into deep within his heart, then spread throughout the rest of his body. This caused his heart and body to tremble inadvertently. He hurriedly loosened his grip, afraid that he would accidentally destroy this little hand. However, after he loosened his grip, the small hand held onto him tightly, as if she was afraid that he would let go. The feeling in his palm caused Ling Chen almost to lose control of his mind, and he didn't talk anymore. He decided to unconditionally believe what the girl had said about the ridiculously simple way to exit, so he gently held her hand and walked out. The instant he took that step, the white world and light blue mist suddenly disappeared. In front of him was boundless darkness. Wow! We're out. I finally came out. Ling Chen stared in front of him as the girl's joyful cheers sounded out. The movement of the girl's hand told him that she was happily jumping up and down, but she didn't seem like she was going to let go. Instead, she began to hold on even tighter. Ling Chen could see some faint blue light out of the corner of his eye, and blue motes of light floated around in the air. Ling Chen turned around and saw the blue crystal orb. The crystal orb looked exactly as it had when Ling Chen had first seen it, and there was still mist swirling around within it. The crystal orb looked around 1 meter in diameter, but he had just been inside and had seen how large it was. Holding the girl's hand, he walked out in a single step. In just that one step, he had walked out from the world within the crystal ball to this dark world. What was this space? Why were there so many things in here that could only appear in fantasy movies? These things couldn't be explained with science. Ling Chen, you're so awesome. You took me out so easily. This is great. You're so powerful. Ling Chen looked over and saw the girl's eyes filled with tremendous appreciation and worship. Facing the girl's smile, much of the confusion within Ling Chen's heart disappeared as he smiled and asked, Sha, how did you know I would be able to save you by doing that? I don't know how I know. I just know. The girl continued to grin. Ling Chen didn't quite know how to respond to this. He looked up in front of him and said in anguish, Even though we came out from that place, but even I can't exit from here. Does Ling Chen want to go home? Sha asked. Then will Ling Chen take me with him? Ling Chen was a bit surprised, then smiled. If Sha's willing, then of course you can. This girl was quite mysterious, and Ling Chen knew nothing about her. She seemed to know nothing about him, but it appeared that she did not mind at all. Taking this girl home. Once this thought appeared, it took root within Ling Chen's heart and became something that he could not get rid of. If he could keep a girl like this by his side, the world would gain a beautiful, resplendent pearl. Beauty like this was irresistible to anyone, including Ling Chen. Really? Yay! The girl once again started to cheer, her smiling face looking like millions of blossoming flowers. Looking at her, Ling Chen almost spaced out again. The girl raised her other hand high in the air as she held out her pinky finger. Ling Chen, you said this yourself. Ling Chen's an adult, so you need to keep your promise, and you can't go back on it. Ling Chen laughed. He stretched out his pinky finger and hooked it with the girl's pinky finger. If I can find my way home, I'll definitely take Xia home and won't go back on my word. Apart from her name, it seemed that this girl also knew of other things. After all, she obviously knew what a pinky promise was. After the big pinky finger and little pinky finger entwined, then shook for a bit, the girl let go with great satisfaction. She pointed towards the blue crystal ball. Ling Chen, I'll tell you a secret. This crystal ball contains very powerful magic. If you tell it where you want to go, it will point you in the right direction. It's true. Ling Chen, as long as you tell it where your home is, it will tell you how to get home. Quickly try it out. Ling Chen's brain froze as he looked at the crystal ball dumbly without doing anything for a while. After entering this dark world, he had encountered many strange and wonderful things, including the white-haired girl next to her. Her beauty, her background, the place where she resided, were all completely mystical, and if this crystal ball could really do what Xia said it could, this would be much too fantasy-like. Standing in front of a crystal ball, telling it where you wanted to go, then having it point out the way for you. This seemed like something that would only happen in a children's storied book. Only kids younger than 3 would believe such a nice plotline. However, apart from this, what other option did Ling Chen have? Since there was only Xia here, and no one else, Ling Chen was afraid of losing face. He stood in front of the crystal ball, adjusted his emotions, then grimaced as he said, I want to return to where I was before I came here. Clang! A strange scene appeared. Just as Ling Chen spoke, the crystal ball suddenly lit up, as the blue motes of light around the crystal ball became denser. Following that, a 2-meter wide ray of blue light shot out from the bottom of the crystal ball, extending as far as Ling Chen could see, creating a blue road of light in this dark world. It's this. If you follow this path, Ling Chen will be able to return to where he wants to go, Xia said as she pointed at the road of blue lights. Ling Chen stared at it, and his jaw almost fell to the ground. It actually succeeded. What the heck? Can this be any more fake? Ling Chen, let's quickly go. I want to go home with Ling Chen. That's what we agreed on. As Ling Chen stared in shock, Xia became incredibly impatient. Only when the little hand vigorously pulled on Ling Chen's hand did he robotically nod his hand, and he held Xia's hand as he stepped onto the blue road. Xia, how did you know that the crystal ball was magical? I don't know. I just knew it was. Ling Chen, when will we get home? She began to call his name more and more affectionately, and seemed very eager to go to this home. It was as if Ling Chen's home was her home. I don't know. It might take a long time, because my home is very far away from here, Ling Chen replied. After entering the dark world, it had taken him a long time to reach the blue crystal ball. If the blue road under his feet were taking him back the same way, it would take the same amount of time. And with a girl by his side, perhaps it would take even longer. As long as I'm with Ling Chen, it doesn't matter how long it takes, the girl loudly said as she looked in front of her. As they walked forwards, the parts of the blue road that they had already walked on disappeared. This way, even if they stopped to rest, they wouldn't have to worry about going the wrong way. After walking for a while, Xia suddenly stopped walking, but she didn't let go of Ling Chen's hand. Are you tired? Ling Chen turned to face her as he asked caringly. Deep down, he didn't want this girl who he had just met to endure any pain or suffering. No. Xiao shook her head, giving Ling Chen an adorable smile. She used her left hand to slightly lift up her white dress, showing her bare feet. I'm not wearing any shoes, so my feet are a bit cold. Ling Chen, can you pick me up? Xiao's voice and expression, which were filled with hope and expectancy, almost melted Ling Chen's heart. He couldn't resist at all, nor did he hesitate as he picked her up, causing her to whoop in joy. She comfortably nestled in his arms and leaned against his chest. He didn't even consider looking for a pair of shoes in his bag. Xiao's arms were around his neck, and a smile of happiness that could melt mystic ice that had been frozen for 10,000 years was on her face. As for Ling Chen, both his soul and body felt incredibly satisfied. From the instant he had seen Xiao, he had wanted to hug her and kiss her. It was natural for anyone to desire beautiful things, and Xiao's charm was something that Ling Chen could not resist. Hugging this snow-white girl, a sense of peace and satisfaction blossomed within Ling Chen's heart, just like when he carried Shui Ruo. He looked at the girl's face, which even the heavens would be jealous of, and walked forward. With the girl in his arms, his footsteps didn't become heavier, but instead became even lighter. On the way here, his only companion had been the darkness. However, now he had a pure white girl affectionately holding on to him. It was the same journey, but the difference was like heaven and earth. Ling Chen reveled in the sensation of holding this girl, and almost wished that the road would go on for longer so he could continue holding this girl. For Ling Chen to feel this way, this girl was incredibly charming. North of the new city, dark clouds covered the sky, and the atmosphere was so dense that the players almost couldn't breathe. The grassy plains, which rarely had players pass over it, was filled with a sea of players. At a glance, this sea of players seemed to extend forever. Above the players, 3 incredibly large, golden flags were blowing in the wind. Each of them was many meters wide, and a single golden character was embroidered on each of them. Together, they spelled out Yinhuan Alliance. With Long Tianyun personally leading them, 2 million Yinhuan Alliance players came to attack the new city. Comparatively, the forces guarding in front of the new city seemed incredibly minuscule. The Yinhuan Alliance had 10 times as many players, and it was only a portion of their strength. On the other hand, the defenders had already brought out all of the forces that they could muster. What's more, there were even more factions coming, looking for an opportunity to strike. With so many armies pressing in before the battle, the defenders faced such massive pressure that they felt that they were going to collapse. No matter if it was the Disillusion Alliance's players or the women of the Snow Moon Luan, they were completely ready for death and had no fear in their hearts. However, when the massive armies arrived, they couldn't help but feel their hearts tighten as the hands holding their weapons slightly trembled. This scene caused Yun Feng and Li Xiaoshui to silently sigh. They had completely expected this. Facing such a view, very few people would be able to remain completely calm. The Yinhuan Alliance's army did not immediately attack the city. Instead, they all stopped in front of it. After a few minutes of silence, a person came out from the center of the army and unhurriedly moved towards the defenders. Next to him, there were tens of powerful elites wearing golden equipment. That's right, it was Long Tianyun. His head was raised, his eyes as piercing as a cold knife. He was riding on a model tiger. This mount was gifted to him by one of the subsidiary guild's leader, and was one of the incredibly rare LV5 mounts in the world. Long Tianyun was very pleased with this gift, and often used it to travel. After all, only the king among beasts was fit to be the mount of the king among men. After moving to an appropriate distance, Long Tianyun stopped as he vindictively looked past all the people towards Meng Xian and the others. He then said in an arrogant tone, I heard that Ling Chen has been traveling here and there recently, and went to the East Ocean continent not too long ago. After coming back, he disappeared and hasn't been seen since. Even now, he hasn't appeared. It seems like he doesn't plan on showing up. Meng Xian looks like you've been abandoned by Ling Chen. Long Tianyun's words were evidently targeting Meng Xian, causing Winter of that year's anger to flare. He stepped forwards as he coldly laughed. Ho ho! So the Yin Huang Alliance's alliance master has been monitoring Ling Chen. Looks like you're quite scared of Ling Chen, eh? No wonder why you had the guts to come here. It was because you knew Ling Chen isn't here. It was true that Long Tianyun was quite afraid of Ling Chen, but of course, he couldn't admit it. Long Tianyun's gaze fell on Winter of that year as he started to wildly laugh. Me? Afraid of Ling Chen? Ha ha ha, if it were just me, of course, I would be scared of him. However, behind me is the Yin Huang Alliance, which can trample on anything under the heavens. Me being afraid of him is a hilarious joke, ha ha ha. However, not seeing Ling Chen here has made me much more at ease. Although he doesn't have the qualifications to make me afraid, he's still quite troublesome. If I wanted to kill him, I'd have to sacrifice quite a lot of resources, which I don't want to do. However, I'm not very happy today. Ling Chen not coming was a surprise, but what makes me even surprised is Long Tianyun's tone became ruthless as his gaze fell on Yunfeng and stared at him maliciously. Yunfeng, can you tell me why you came here and brought so many people with you? Yunfeng's eyelids jumped, but he looked right back at Long Tianyun as he expressionlessly replied, It's as you see it, I'm here to stop you. Ha ha ha. Long Tianyun coldly laughed as he narrowed his eyes and said in a cold voice, It wasn't easy for the Yun family to develop to its current position. To the rest of the world, you're all incredibly high and mighty, but to me, you're just a bunch of businessmen who have had a bit of success. If I want you to prosper, you'll be able to prosper. If I want you to be ruined, you'll be ruined. And if I want to destroy your family, it'll be destroyed. After destroying you, a new Yun family will immediately be established. Yunfeng's fists were clenched together as his entire body slightly trembled. His teeth were in pain from him tightly gritting them together, feeling like they would break. For me to desire Meng Xian is the best thing to happen to your Yun family. However, it's a pity that you've all disappointed me. Long Tianyun shook his head in disappointment. However, your Yun family is quite fortunate that my feelings towards Meng Xian haven't changed, and I quite appreciate you as well, Yunfeng. As such, even though you've disappointed me, I'll still give you, as well as the entire Yun family, a chance. Yunfeng, if you take your people and immediately disappear, I can pretend that I didn't see you here today. Meng Xian's hatred the atmosphere suddenly became heavier, and the Disillusion Alliance's players looked back, waiting for Yunfeng's reply. Right from the start, all of them thought that Yunfeng's actions were entirely irrational. Yunfeng and the Disillusion Alliance weren't just an unaffiliated faction. Rather, they had strong connections with the Yin Huang Alliance and the Long family. Within the virtual world, the Disillusion Alliance had always been a subsidiary guild of the Yin Huang Alliance. For Yunfeng and the Disillusion Alliance to come stop the Yin Huang Alliance, all of the players in China would soon know about this. This was equivalent to the Disillusion Alliance completely cutting ties with the Yin Huang Alliance. If this new city was incredibly important to him, and doing this gave the new city a chance at survival, it would be worth it. However, everyone knew, clear as day, although the Disillusion Alliance was quite powerful, they were nothing compared to the Yin Huang Alliance. Not only would they be unable to protect the new city, but the entire Disillusion and Yun family would also be dragged in as well. It was not worth it at all, and was an incredibly stupid move. As such, the Disillusion Alliance's players all hoped that Yun Feng would decide to leave, and not stubbornly stay. Yun Feng's face became bright red. Long Tianyun was blatantly using the Yun family's safety to threaten him, making him so angry that he felt like exploding. He knew clearly that Long Tianyun wasn't threatening him like this because he feared the Disillusion Alliance. In fact, even if there were another Disillusion Alliance, it would make no difference to them except that it would cost them a bit more time. Long Tianyun was just trying to show him, and Yun Meng Xian, the Long family's unparalleled might and power. If Yun Feng crumbled under Long Tianyun's threats towards the Yun family today, he would live his entire life under Long Tianyun's shadow, and would never be able to lift his head in front of him. If Yun Feng decided to stay here and defend the city, Long Tianyun would have ample reason to act against the Yun family. Yun Feng didn't retreat, nor did he allow himself to retreat. He gripped his fists together as he furiously replied, "Long Tianyun, what I'm doing today is simply my actions, and has nothing to do with the rest of the Yun family. There's no need for you to threaten me with my family. Since I've come here today, I won't leave. Even if my strength can't help Meng Xian much, if you want me to run away in front of my little sister, humph. Even if you threaten me with the whole world, I wouldn't do it." "Well said. You're a real man." Winter of that year loudly praised him. His impression of this person, who he had only met today, became 100 times better. "Really now? It looks like you've decided to embark on a path of foolishness. I've given you a chance, so if anything happens that you can't accept, don't blame me," Long Tianyun said, as he coldly smiled. He then looked at Li Xiao. "Big Miss Li, your appearance here isn't very surprising either. This city is larger than the largest city my Yinhuang Alliance constructed by many times. The only people in China who would have such finances are your Li family. Moreover, I heard a few months ago that Meng Xian and Big Miss Li had become quite close." "What? Are you also going to tell me that if you want my Li family to prosper, we'll prosper, and if you want us to be destroyed, we'll be destroyed?" Li Xiaoshui's upturned eyes narrowed as she smirked, speaking in an amused tone. "No, no, no. With your Li family's finances, I'm sure no one in the world can mess with your Li family. However, I just received an interesting piece of news. I heard that the Skyfall Alliance canceled your partnership." "Ha ha! This is quite a big piece of news, and its timing is quite coincidental too. Before, I was worried that the Skyfall Alliance might stop us. That would be a big problem. However, it seems that this won't be an issue. Instead, it's going to become your problem. You should know that the Skyfall Alliance desires the city creation token no less than any other faction. Big Miss Li, it seems that the Skyfall Alliance canceling your partnership has forced you to bring out these women you've kept hidden. However, it's a pity that no matter if it's men or women, as long as they're enemies, my Yinhuang Alliance will not show any mercy." Long Tianyun raised his head as he looked to the south, as he said in a meaningful tone, "Training so many women definitely isn't easy. If it was all destroyed in an instant, wouldn't that be quite the pity? Moreover, to construct a city of such a shocking scale, your Li family must have invested quite a bit. If this was all destroyed, I'm sure that even an incredibly rich big miss like you wouldn't be very happy about it. To avoid all of this unhappiness, Big Miss Li, I have a business proposal for you. I'm sure you'll be interested." "A business proposal? The thing I, Li Xiaoshui, loves most are business proposals. However, young Master Long, you should know that I never do deals that aren't beneficial to me," Li Xiaoshui replied while smiling. Facing Long Tianyun and the 2 million players behind him, she was the only one who remained completely calm. It wasn't as if the new city was beyond salvation. She still had one last card up her sleeve. Apart from herself, no one knew about this. Of course, I know about this. Naturally, I wouldn't bring shame upon myself to propose a deal that was not beneficial to Big Miss Li. Long Tianyun said proudly. He stretched out his hand and pointed towards the south. Big Miss Li, do you mind telling me how much money your Li family has invested in this city? Li Xiao raised an eyebrow as she realized what this business proposal was going to be. The amount of money that she had invested so far was unbelievably cheap. The land belonged to the fairy clan, and humans had no authority over it. As long as they received permission from the fairy clan, they could use the city creation token there. As such, this cut out the time and money required to apply to the royal city for permission to build there. Moreover, they had saved a massive fortune on the workers. They had the world's best workers and engineers, the dwarves. Their talent, abilities, efficiency, and passion were things that ordinary high-level builders could not compare to. As for their expenses, all they wanted were 3 meals per day. Most of the resources they required for building had come from the fairy forest, and some especially important resources were taken from the fairy realm. As such, Li Xiao only needed to buy the materials that could not be found within the fairy forest from the main cities. Up until today, they had spent only 3 billion gold. Even an idiot wouldn't believe such a thing. Of course, Li Xiao wouldn't tell the truth. She replied without hesitating, "This city's a bit big, so all up, we only invested a small 100 billion. 100 billion? Very well." Long Tianyun slowly nodded as he slowly replied, "My Yin Huang Alliance is willing to spend 10 billion gold to buy this city, as well as the city creation token." Hearing Long Tianyun's words, everyone fell deathly silent, with strange expressions on their faces. Calmly offering 10 billion gold to buy something that someone else had spent 100 billion gold on, as well as such time and effort, was ridiculously arrogant and shameless. Even the Yin Huang Alliance's players thought the same thing as everyone else. What the hell? Yun Feng's face became ashen, and Winter of that year's eyes almost shot out fire. And yet, Li Xiao giggled. "Little Lord Long, with your business mind and aggressiveness, it's a pity that you didn't go into business. If you went into business, I'm afraid that your esteemed face would cover all the toilets in the world. It's hard for me, Li Xiao, not to be moved by your incredible offer. However, you've asked the wrong person. My Li family is only an investor, and doesn't actually own the city. Instead, it's Meng Xian. So if you want to buy the city, you'll have to ask." "Really now?" Long Tianyun nodded, and his tone became gentler when he looked at Yun Meng Xian. "Meng Xian, what do you think of this business proposal?" Yun Meng Xian remained silent and didn't even look at him. "Before coming here, I was waiting for you to come and find me and give me the city creation token. I thought that you would stop refusing me. After all, if you did that, this wouldn't have happened, and you would at least own half of the new city in the future. Within the Yin Huang Alliance, you would have a position equal to mine. Your Yun family would also share in your glory, and surpassing even the Li family would be possible." Long Tianyun gave a long sigh as he said sorrowfully, "However, you've once again disappointed me. I'm quite unhappy with this new city, and you've made me quite displeased. However, you, Yun Meng Xian, possess a charm that makes my heart softer. As such, even though I brought so many people here, I still made that proposal. Meng Xian, this is your final chance. I hope you won't disappoint me. You don't need to say any more." Yun Meng Xian, who had remained silent this entire time, coldly spoke, and cut off Long Tianyun. "You're but a cowardly and vile bandit, and yet you dare to shamelessly make yourself seem like the pitiful and righteous one. I feel that it's humiliating to even talk to someone like you. Long Tianyun, do you not feel ashamed of yourself?" Long Tianyun's initial threats made Yun Meng Xian feel quite frustrated. After Heart's dream was destroyed, she started to hate him. Now, Seeing that her sweat, blood, and tears were about to be destroyed by him, Long Tianyun had become an evil demon that deserved to be cut into pieces by thousands of knives. Her hatred towards him had reached the extreme. Facing Long Tianyun, it was the first time in many years since she'd lost control of her emotions. Those present all stared with their jaws wide open, staring at Meng Xian with comical expressions. They never thought that the incredibly elegant and goddess-like Meng Xian would be able to vent like this. After quite a while, Winter of that year yelled out, "Well said. This guy's simply a bandit who has no face and no ass. And what? He's trying to look all indignant like a saint." Xiao. Long Tianyun's face, which had maintained an elegant expression, was now twisted in anger. The number of times he had been scolded or cursed it could be counted on a single hand. With his background and status, who would dare to say such words to him? To be insulted like this by the woman who he vowed to have, he felt incredibly furious. You can stop spouting nonsense." Just as Long Tianyun said a single word, Meng Xian coldly cut him off. "Your shameless and despicable stealing and destroying already make people hold you in contempt, so why try to seem like a good person hypocritically? Do your worst. Even if this city is destroyed, I won't give you a single brick or tile." A single emperor ravages the army. Each man has a goddess within his heart. Long Tianyun's goddess was Meng Xian. Ever since he saw Meng Xian's appearance that year, he had vowed to make her his own. As time passed, Meng Xian's beauty became even more breathtaking, and Long Tianyun desired her even more. However, Meng Xian had expressed her determination towards him, with every word filled with disgust and hatred. If anyone else had said those words, Long Tianyun would have wildly laughed. However, hearing it from Meng Xian's mouth, no one could bear such a bad taste in their mouths. Long Tianyun's face became slightly pale, and he felt so angry that he wanted to cough up blood. He subconsciously gritted his teeth as he spoke in a slightly trembling, sinister voice. Good. You forced me to this. Ha ha. Ha ha. It looks like you're still hoping that Ling Tian will come and save you. It's impossible for him to come, and even if he did, 100 or even 1,000 Ling Tians would be unable to help you. Even he would have to die here. All players, heed my command. Everyone could hear the fury in Long Tianyun's voice, and as he roared out all troops, heed my command, every Yin Huang Alliance player's heart tightened as their blood began to boil. Before, our goal today was to destroy the city at all costs. Long Tianyun did not lose his rationality, and instead became so furious that he started to laugh. He began to speak slowly, and his eyes became as venomous and sinister as a snake. But now, I've changed my mind. We'll save the fun in destroying the city for last. What I want you all to do now is quickly kill all of these people blocking our way. Don't spare a single one of them. Understood? Long Tianyun shouted as loudly as he could, and his voice traveled quite far. Through the guild channel, his orders were transmitted into every Yin Huang Alliance player's ears. Before destroying the city, he wanted to massacre all of these defenders. Understood! The simultaneous reply from the players made it feel as if the world was shaking. 2 million voices shouting out as one made it seem like lightning and thunder were raining down from the 9 heavens. Then what are you waiting for? Kill! Kill! As the thunderous shout sounded out, countless horses galloped through the grassy plains. Innumerable paladin shield-bearers rode their large, powerful steeds, raising their heavy shields as they rushed at the front of the Yin Huang Alliance's army. With 200,000 heavy cavalry moving out, it felt as if even mountains could be moved. The land shook, and they brought with them a terrifying momentum as they mercilessly charged towards the Disillusion Alliance's players. Behind them, berserkers began moving out as well, causing the earth to tremble. Following them were Slayers and Shadowless, then the Archers and Elementalists. Finally, at the back were the Summoners and Support Mages doing their summons and buffs. 2 million players were split into hundreds of teams. Each team had their own formation, and they all moved out as one. The aura and momentum they had was simply astounding. Seeing this, the Disillusion Alliance's players' pupils contracted as they felt their bodies weaken, and their feet and legs started to tremble. Seeing the heavy cavalry in front of them, although they were quite far away, they could already see themselves being sent flying in an instant and completely broken through. Most of their faces paled, and some people at the front involuntarily took a step back, as their entire bodies trembled. The Yin Huang Alliance's heavy cavalry were famous throughout the entire world. Under the assault of 10,000 cavalries, even a mountain would be shattered. None of the large alliances could talk about them with a calm face, and those cavalry had almost doomed even Ling Chen. After shield bearers completed their second profession upgrade and became heavy shield guardians and paladin shield bearers, the might of heavy cavalry increased exponentially. Over 200,000 heavy cavalry facing enemies, which numbered just over 100,000, was simply overkill. The Disillusion Alliance's players felt as if their souls were sent flying in fear. Long Tianyun had given them the order to kill these defenders as quickly as possible. No one within the Yin Huang Alliance dared to disobey Long Tianyun's commands, and in order to accomplish this as soon as possible, none of them held back. Yun Feng's expression fell, and even Li Xiaoshui deeply frowned, while winter of that year and 100 miles of ice looked incredibly shocked. They were all thinking the same thing. If they rushed over like this, these 230,000 players would be destroyed in an instant. Yun Feng gritted his teeth and stepped forwards as he roared, "Don't panic! The Yin Huang Alliance's heavy cavalry isn't as terrifying as you think." Hunters quickly set up horse traps. Shield bearers, warriors, retreat, marksmen and archers advance and prepare to shoot the first row of cavalry. Yun Feng understood just how terrifying these heavy cavalries were, but also knew their weaknesses. His strategy was the best way of dealing with them. However, less than 40% of the Disillusion Alliance's players had completed their second profession upgrade, and less than half of the archers who had done their second profession upgrade were hunters. With a few hunters laying traps, and the very few marksmen in the army, it was almost impossible to stop this heavy cavalry. The ground shook more and more, and the heavy cavalry came closer and closer. The marksmen and archers at the front of the Disillusion Alliance's ranks prepared to shoot, but their hands were all trembling. Cold sweat beaded their foreheads, and they could only wait in fear for the impending nightmare. Scree! At this moment, the shrill cry of a bird sounded out from above, piercing through the sounds of the heavy cavalry's galloping. This sound traveled into every player's ears, and they all looked towards where they heard the sound originate. In the east, a gigantic gray bird was flying towards them at an astonishing speed. It seemed as fast as lightning, and in the blink of an eye, it had traveled from the distance to be right in front of them. "That's one of the celestial grade pets on the pet rankings, the Lightning Falcon," Yun Feng shouted out in shock. "I remember that its master is... In just a moment, the Lightning Falcon reached the space above the two armies. It suddenly gave a long cry as it pulled its wings against its body, and quickly dropped down towards the ground, towards the massive army of heavy cavalry. As it pulled its wings in, the person standing on its back was revealed. "Sword! Sword Emperor! It's the Sword Emperor! It's Lord Sword Emperor!" The gray cloak, as well as that sharp aura that made one feel as if there was a sword pressed against their neck. Apart from the Sword Emperor, who else could it be? The Yin Huang Alliance began to yell out, and some players even forgot to charge. They looked up and stared with their mouths wide open as they gaped at this legend, who was said to have betrayed the Yin Huang Alliance. They watched as the Sword Emperor dove towards the heavy cavalry and came closer and closer. This scene looked like a tiny fish charging towards a gigantic shark. Whoosh! The expected collision didn't occur. Just as the lightning falcon was about to ram into the heavy cavalry, it drew a beautiful arc and it flew back towards the sky. At the same time, a silver flash swept out in front of the heavy cavalry and drew out a 30-meter-long silver line. Chi-chi-chi-chi-chi-chi. The sound of a sword piercing through flesh rang out as the silver light, like a death god's scythe, pierced through 20 or so players' heads. These players were the ones who had been charging at the front. The heavy cavalry had incredible might, and once they started charging, there was almost nothing that could stop them. However, they had a fatal weakness. Once the cavalry at the front faltered, the ones behind them would fall into chaos. The reason was, very simply, because they were all charging at full speed. If the front fell, the people at the back would be unable to stop, and would also be tripped. This would cause a chain reaction, and the faster they were charging, the greater the chain reaction would be. Once this sort of chain reaction started, the consequences would be dire. This sort of disastrous event could start with a single person falling over. After being hit by the Sword Emperor's attack, although the front line, who were all paladin shield bearers, who had completed their second profession upgrade and had powerful defense, were still killed. After dying, their corpses and horses heavily fell to the ground, causing the cavalry behind them to look on in shock. They were unable to stop in time and were tripped up by the corpses and horses on the ground. The players screamed and were thrown into the air, then heavily fell to the ground. The chain reaction began, and the cavalry behind them began to flip and fall, causing the organized formation to tumble into utter chaos. The falling of the players and horses also affected those next to them, and soon there was a mass of players and horses on the ground, as they all stampeded over each other. Whoosh! The lightning falcon, which had flown into the air, once again dropped down, and a new sword appeared in the Sword Emperor's hand. As she slashed out with it, another silver sliver swept out, piercing into the front lines of the cavalry to her side, as heavier cavalry were killed. As they dropped, the troops behind them also fell into chaos. The lightning falcon once again moved. Its speed was not something with which this cavalry could contend. When it found a new target, standard swords appeared in the Sword Emperor's left and right hands, then turned into silver meteors as they flew towards the left and right. She. The Sword Emperor sent out sword after sword, which flew out like a monstrous death god's size. Each sword took at least 20 lives, and each time they would attack the ones at the front. In a mere 10 breaths of time, before everyone could recover from the Sword Emperor's appearance, she had traveled from the east to the west, as 20 or so rays of silver light swept towards the cavalry. Because of how fast they had been charging, the cavalry fell into complete and utter chaos. Players stacked on players, and horses stacked on horses, while countless people cried out and screamed. Taking down the chief within an army, the incredibly powerful heavy cavalry was almost completely wiped out by the Sword Emperor. Their strength wasn't able to deal any losses to the enemy, and instead caused themselves a huge disaster. Under such circumstances, it was possible for people to calm down and quickly regroup, but this was not the same for their frightened mounts. Before players who had been thrown off could even stand up, they would be once again sent flying by mounts that were desperately looking for their owners. Just like that, hundreds of thousands of players and horses were thrown around, stampeding on each other. In fact, some people even died from being repeatedly bashed. The unstoppable charging machine had been turned into an absolute mess, and had even blocked the non-cavalry players behind them. With something of such a large scale, they would not be able to reorganize within a short period. A single person had caused all of this. The Sword Emperor, with her near magical performance, had stopped 200,000 heavy cavalries by herself. In the distance to the north, tens of guilds watched from afar, preparing to make a move. As they watched the Yin-Huang Alliance's heavy cavalry charge out, their hearts trembled. With their own forces facing such an onslaught, they would be annihilated. However, the Sword Emperor did cause their eyeballs almost to pop out. This is the Sword Emperor? The previous rank 1 on the Heaven rankings? A single person took down hundreds of thousands of heavy cavalries. Oh my god, is that even humanly possible? This isn't the level of an emperor anymore, but of a god. I've long since heard that the Sword Emperor betrayed the Yin-Huang Alliance, and seeing the Sword Emperor now attacking the Yin-Huang Alliance, it seems that he's decided to protect the new city. The Sword Emperor's a terrifying monster, and now that the Yin-Huang Alliance has lost him, it's like they've lost an arm. The Sword Emperor becoming their enemy is a complete nightmare for the Yin-Huang Alliance. He can completely change the tides of the battle because he's the Sword Emperor. He seems even more powerful than before. The Sword Emperor's performance, which lasted less than a minute, caused the big bosses of all the guilds to remember her name in fear. They decided never to offend this person. After all, offending an expert just meant having a powerful enemy. They could simply destroy that person with numbers. However, offending the Sword Emperor, that would be an unending nightmare. Over on the side of the new city, Yun Feng and the others stared with their mouths wide open, their eyes bulging as they spaced out. Within them, only Mu Bingyao had fought with the Sword Emperor before and was defeated, so she somewhat knew of the Sword Emperor's strength. However, seeing the Sword Emperor's current strength, Mu Bingyao was dumbfounded. She knew that the Sword Emperor always kept her sword on her, and that her attacks were so fast that they couldn't be followed by the naked eye, and could cut enemies into pieces in an instant. However, she never knew that the Sword Emperor could wield her swords without even holding them, and the speed was simply incredible. Her skills had reached a level of perfection, and her using two swords was even more incredible. So amazing, Winter of that year said as he stared. As he spoke, he deeply gulped as he thought of him thoughtlessly attacking the Sword Emperor to provoke her. He rubbed his neck as he felt cold sweat flowed down his body. 100 miles of ice's gaze followed the Sword Emperor's body, and his eyes burned with a strange light. This Sword Emperor was a completely different person to the one he knew. Could this be the Sword Emperor's true power? As he watched the cavalry collapse, Yun Feng finally remembered what he should be done. He equipped his weapons with a whoosh as he charged forwards while yelling, "Brothers and sisters, do you see that? The Yin-Huang Alliance's heavy cavalry aren't so great. Before they've even reached us, they started trampling on themselves. With the Sword Emperor standing on our side, what do we have to be afraid of? This is our chance. Brothers and sisters, charge! Kill them all!" Yun Feng almost tore his throat apart yelling, and his thundering voice caused the hearts of the players of the Disillusion Alliance and Snow Moon Luan to tremble. Looking at the fearsome cavalry, which was in complete disarray, their fear completely disappeared as their blood started to boil. "Kill!" The Disillusion Alliance let out a heaven-shaking roar as they raised their weapons and ran as fast as they could towards the Yin-Huang Alliance's army. Their battle cry was not at all inferior to the one given by the Yin-Huang Alliance before, and the Snow Moon Luan charged right behind them. The heavy cavalries might come from their charging abilities, which was incredibly destructive. Now, it was impossible for them to perform the same charge that they had unleashed before. Shield Bearer's main was most useful against powerful bosses, but in large, chaotic battles, they could only do some blocking and dealt very little damage. It was difficult for them to keep up in a fast-paced battle, and while they were still in chaos and disarray, the Disillusion Alliance and Snow Moon Luan had charged up. They were all still trying to stand up and find their mounts and had no time to get into formation. Like two massive waves, the attackers and defenders finally clashed. Countless icy glints of weapons appeared as they mercilessly attacked their enemies. The fierce battle had finally officially begun. Vicious roars, pitiful wails, and furious cries, as well as the sounds of weapons clashing, were deafening and filled the battlefield. The two armies merged, forming a chaotic sea of people. Because of how large the two armies were, the line of battle became longer and longer. The Yin-Huang alliance possessed an absolute advantage regarding numbers, but because of the chaos caused by the heavy cavalry at the front, the back line was completely blocked off and was unable to fight. As such, they could not capitalize on their numbers advantage. As for the defenders, with the Sword Emperor as their mental support, they rushed up without any regard for their lives as they mercilessly attacked the shield bearers. The archers at the back continuously let loose arrows. At this point, there was no point aiming randomly. Shooting was guaranteed to hit enemies, due to how densely packed they were. This trash! These bastards! Long Tianyun, who had retreated to the center of the army, was so furious that he was trembling. He had thought that the heavy cavalry would be more than enough to crush the weak defenders. After all, the other side only had 1/10 of the total forces that they had. It would be incredibly easy to deal with them. However, he never expected the Sword Emperor to appear and use her monstrous abilities to send the heavy cavalry into complete disarray. If the Sword Emperor had originally been his enemy, that wouldn't have been much. However, the Sword Emperor had once been part of the Yin-Huang alliance and had followed his orders. Long Tianyun simply couldn't understand why she had betrayed him. After the battle started, it was his Yin-Huang alliance that was on the defensive. This was a great humiliation to Long Tianyun. He smashed his fist into the tiger's head below him as he roared, "Bong Xiao! Give me a goddamn explanation why you're doing this!" Just as he spoke, he suddenly felt something and looked up. His pupils dilated as the gray bird sped towards him at a shocking speed. On the giant bird's back, the Sword Emperor's gray cloak billowed, emanating sword chi. Lord Sword Emperor! Protect the Alliance Master! Protect the Alliance Master!" By the time Long Tianyun had discovered the Sword Emperor, his golden guardians also noticed her. They panicked as they did their best to quickly form an iron drum formation, surrounding Long Tianyun in the middle. The Lightning Falcon was simply too fast and was flying high in the air, so it was simply unstoppable. It arrived above Long Tianyun in the blink of an eye. More and more people gathered around Long Tianyun to defend him, but not a single one of them felt at ease, and their hearts trembled because they were facing a legend among Chinese players, the Sword Emperor. As the Lightning Falcon cried out, two silvers, single-handed swords appeared in the Sword Emperor's hands. These two swords were at most silver grade, but in the Sword Emperor's hands, they were hundreds, if not thousands, of times more terrifying than mysterious god-grade equipment in normal players' hands. The instant the players saw the silver light within the Sword Emperor's hands, a wave of coldness flowed through their hearts. Swish! The swords streaked like comets towards Long Tianyun. The crowd charged up, using their bodies to prevent these two swords from harming Long Tianyun. If these were arrows, they could use their bodies to block them. Similarly, if they were spells, they could also use the same tactic. However, these swords came from the Sword Emperor, and each was full of a boundless sword intent. How could they stop them like that? Chi. The two swords pierced through all of the bodies that tried to block it as if they were thin sheets of paper. Let alone stop, they didn't even slow down the swords. The swords pierced through more than 30 people, piercing towards Long Tianyun's chest. At this moment, two loud cries sounded out from Long Tianyun's sides. They came from two players wearing golden armor and holding golden shields as they blocked in front of Long Tianyun. Their golden shields gave off a dense light of protection. Unbreaking Shield. Hod! Unbreaking Shield was the strongest defensive skill for shield bearers after completing their second profession upgrade. The skill gave absolute defense and could nullify any physical attack. 2 Unbreaking Shields defended against the two swords, and everyone watched as they were about to clash. Whoosh! The scene of the swords being sent flying by the shields did not happen, because right before the swords were about to smash into the shields, they suddenly changed direction and shot upwards, evading the unbreaking shields and the two shield bearers. They then fell towards and pierced into Long Tianyun's body. Alliance! Alliance Master! Alliance Master! Thousands of elites from the Yin Huang Alliance were unable to stop a single, casual attack from the Sword Emperor. They could only watch as Long Tianyun was killed by a single strike from the Sword Emperor, while 2 million players surrounded him. Although Long Tianyun had not yet fallen, how many people, in all of China, could survive a hit from the Sword Emperor without being insta-killed? The swords that had pierced through tens of players stabbed into Long Tianyun's body and remained there, as two huge damaged figures rose up. Long Tianyun's mouth widened as his pupils contracted, staring at the Sword Emperor in the air. He simply couldn't understand why this person, who had obeyed his orders for so many years and never disobeyed him, would attack him so mercilessly without any hesitation. However, Long Tianyun's death was not the end. As the Yin Huang Alliance's players howled, his body, which had not fallen yet, strangely rose up in the air. The two swords brought it to the front of the army, where the fighting was, and heavily fell to the ground. Just like that, his body was nailed to the ground by the swords. This pitiful corpse went on display for both armies that were furiously fighting. 5 Sword Emperors. When Long Tianyun's body fell from the sky and landed in the center of the battlefield, all of the players on both sides saw it clearly. The incredibly chaotic battlefield fell deathly silent, then erupted into yells and screams. Alliance! Alliance Master? The Alliance Master died. The Alliance Master died. No matter if it was the Yin Huang Alliance's players or the defenders, this scene was simply too much. This was especially so for the Yin Huang Alliance's players seeing Long Tianyun's corpse nailed to the ground. They stared with their mouths wide open and completely spaced out. They even forgot about the enemies in front of them. The players from the Disillusion Alliance and Snow Moon Lulon were also flabbergasted, and couldn't believe their own eyes until they heard the yells in their ears. Long Tianyun's dead. Everyone look! The Yin Huang Alliance's Alliance Master has died. What do we need to be afraid of? What are we still waiting for? If we defeat them, we'll become a legend. Long Tianyun's corpse, as well as the yells in the ears, caused the defenders' hearts to beat as they felt their blood heating up rapidly. They waved their weapons as they charged towards the shocked Yin Huang Alliance, and cut down many of their enemies while they were still spaced out. The Yin Huang Alliance allowing their Alliance Master to be killed despite facing 200,000 players, with 2 million players, was a humiliation that they would never be able to wash away. Long Tianyun's death caused the players, as well as many leaders, to become completely dumbfounded. The Yin Huang Alliance's players' morale greatly fell, and were suppressed, and eventually beaten back by the defenders. Holy crap! So goddamn amazing! Winter of that year gulped down saliva as he rubbed his eyes, feeling complete and utter respect towards the Sword Emperor. The Sword Emperor had executed Long Tianyun with a single strike, and had completely disregarded the 2 million players around her. Even to a super expert like Winter of that year, she was a legendary existence. His appearance has caused the tides of this battle to turn in our favor completely. Li Xiao sighed in awe. However, why would he help us? Is it because of Ling Tian? She knew that on that night at the Long family's residence, Ling Chen had been saved by the Sword Emperor. After that night, the Sword Emperor betrayed the Long family and Xian Yuan family, as well as the Yin Huang alliance, and disappeared. This was the first time the Sword Emperor had appeared in public after that night.
There might be some friendship between him and Ling Tian,
Meng Xian said emotionally. She was unable to calm down after seeing this unexpected scene. She tightly gripped her clothes, her palms full of sweat.
Friendship?
Xiao started to feel suspicious. She had spent a great deal of time and resources to investigate the Sword Emperor, but even she did not know the Sword Emperor's true identity, nor why the Sword Emperor was always wrapped up. She simply couldn't understand why this mysterious person would never show their appearance. However, what she could confirm was that the Sword Emperor had cut off all emotions, never spoke, and only followed orders like a robot. The Sword Emperor had been around for almost 10 years. How could the Sword Emperor have a friendship with Ling Tian? Xiao quickly went through the information she had on the Sword Emperor in her mind, and thought back earlier, back when Ling Chen was still in the Long family. Suddenly, a long-forgotten name surfaced in her mind.
Could it be that the Sword Emperor is Meng Xian? Do you think the Sword Emperor is a man or a woman?
Xiao suddenly asked.
Of course he's a man,
Meng Xian replied, feeling that it was a strange question.
No one's seen the Sword Emperor before, so how do you know he's a man?
Xiao continued to ask. Meng Xian gave her a sideways glance.
Since the Sword Emperor appeared, he's remained at the top of the heaven rankings. How could such a powerful person be a woman?
Xiao didn't say anything else and gave a smile that didn't seem like a smile. She sighed in awe as she thought to herself,
what an amazing man! At such a young age, he made a girl whose heart was so cold fall so in love with him. If this interesting guess of mine is correct, then, you fickle man, out of all the women by your side, which one can compare to her regarding how much they love you and are willing to give up for you?
In the distance, the leaders of the large guilds were covered in sweat, and some even trembled. When Long Tianyun's corpse rose to the sky, and then they nailed it to the ground, their hearts almost jumped out from their throats. Long Tianyun had brought 2 million players, and yet had died so pitifully. If they attacked the city, who would be able to escape from the Sword Emperor? Dying wasn't too bad after all. This was a virtual game, so after they died, they could revive later by other players. Moreover, in such a massive battlefield, only very few people saw their Alliance Master's death. After being revived, the Alliance Master would be able to shout into the guild channel, and most people would never even know that the Alliance Master had died. However, after Long Tianyun had died, his corpse was lifted up and dropped in the center of the battlefield. This had the effect of pouring cold water over all of the Yin Huang Alliance's players, and substantially decreased their morale, greatly impacting the situation. At the same time, as the Alliance Master of a large guild, after dying in such a manner, how would he be able to maintain his face and reputation? Seeing the dead Long Tianyun, the faces of the bosses of the large guilds became ashen. Thinking to the two-word Sword Emperor, their necks shrunk back, and they felt as if there was a cold wind blowing against their backs. All of these big bosses viewed their reputation and face as more important than their lives. After all, the fights for the first guild and only city were all for fame and reputation. They would all rather die 100 times any other way than die in humiliation like Long Tianyun.
Alliance Master, Long Tianyun has died. Perhaps this is a good opportunity should we, opportunity my ass. Hold your breath and wait here. Didn't you hear Long Tianyun's orders from before? They're not just attacking the city, they're trying to kill all of those defenders. In other words, this is their conflict. Only someone who's mentally ill would go and invite trouble on themselves. Yes, yes, yes.
Long Tianyun's death brought a tremendous shock to the Yin-Huang alliance. The Sword Emperor, who had just killed Long Tianyun in a single strike, jumped down from the Lightning Falcon into the Yin-Huang alliance's army, right in the center of 2 million players. Apart from the Sword Emperor, who else would dare to jump within an army of millions of enemies? Most of the Yin-Huang alliance's elites had admired the Sword Emperor as their idol and thought of the Sword Emperor as an invincible legend. When meeting the Sword Emperor, they would scarce dare to breathe loudly. To be able to join the Yin-Huang alliance that the Sword Emperor was part of, they felt incredibly honored. They never thought that one day they would fight against the Sword Emperor. Seeing the Sword Emperor descend from the sky, although many allies surrounded them, their hearts all trembled. They couldn't feel any safer, only a cold chill. Watching the Sword Emperor jump down, not a single person attacked. Instead, they all hurriedly retreated. By the time the Sword Emperor landed, there was a 10 or so meters region of empty space around her. Surrounding this area were countless eyes filled with fear, and all of the players' hands trembled as they gripped their weapons. Clang! Clang! 2 silver swords appeared in the Sword Emperor's hands, similar to the ones with which she had killed Long Tianyun. The Sword Emperor moved, and a gray blur moved like divine lightning, disappearing from everyone's view. Following this, 10 or so damaged figures rose up, and 10 or so cries sounded out. The gray blur once again moved, whirling with both swords. No one could see the Sword Emperor's attack patterns clearly. This was because every time she struck, the swords in her hands essentially vanished, and in a moment, another 10 players had died. The fact that the Sword Emperor could attack more than 10 times in an instant was already common knowledge within China. As the cries sounded out, seeing their allies fall, the Yin-Huang alliance's players finally realized what was happening. The Sword Emperor was no longer part of the Yin-Huang alliance, and was instead their enemy, and had even just killed Long Tianyun. The Sword Emperor was a terrifying enemy, but they had to raise their weapons towards the Sword Emperor. After all, if the Sword Emperor didn't die, they would be the ones dying. The Yin-Huang alliance finally started to surround the Sword Emperor and attack. A sea of players that extended as far as the eye could see swarmed towards a single target. They believed that with so many people, even the Sword Emperor would die under such an assault. With so many enemies around her, the Sword Emperor stopped moving, as the 2 swords flew out of her hands and started to fly around her. They were 2 swords, but because of how quickly they were moving, the sound they singing out resembled a tornado. As they flew through the air, they instant took the lives of tens of players, leaving 2 trails of corpses. When the 2 swords flew out 30 meters, they didn't fall, but instead continued to move in an arc, causing more sounds of blades tearing through flesh. At the same time, another 2 swords appeared in the Sword Emperor's hands, and also shot out. It seemed as if the swords had their own lives in minds, and the 4 swords continuously took lives around the Sword Emperor. At this moment, a 5th sword had appeared in the Sword Emperor's hands. This sword was not another silver sword, but a celestial-grade sword that she had obtained from killing a celestial-grade boss. It was the Sword Emperor's true weapon. With the sword in her hands, the Sword Emperor dove into the ranks of the completely shocked Yin-Huang alliance players, as illusory swords filled the space around her. Even the shield-bearers, who had incredibly strong defense, couldn't take a single hit from the illusory swords. Around the Sword Emperor, the 4 silver swords flew around her within 30 meters, spinning and flying straight, piercing and slashing. The rate at which she killed her enemies was simply monstrous. It was as if another 4 Sword Emperors were controlling them. Anyone who dared to approach within 30 meters of the Sword Emperor was instantly killed. A single Sword Emperor could face an army of 1,000 players. What about 5? Wherever the Sword Emperor went, she left behind a mountain of corpses. Her jumping into the center of the army wasn't her casting herself into a trap, and was instead like a sharp and indestructible sword stabbing into the Yin-Huang Alliance army's heart. Real world, Beijing. Because Long Tianyun had spread the information, this battle for the new city had been given quite a bit of attention. Almost every player was awaiting the result of this battle. When news came that the Sword Emperor had appeared, Xianyuan Dao had hurriedly turned on the screen, then searched for where she was. Ever since she had departed that night, he hadn't received any news about her. Even until now, he didn't know why she had done this. However, in the end, she was his flesh and blood, and after not hearing about her for so long, he couldn't help but worry. When Xianyuan Dao finally saw the Sword Emperor, his body trembled, as an expression of shock and disbelief appeared on his face. After a while, he reached out to rub his eyes with his trembling hands, again and again. He leaned in closer and closer to the screen, but simply couldn't believe what he was saying. Sword intent could be brought into the virtual world along with one's mind, just like Esper abilities. This was something most people knew. The Sword Emperor was so powerful because she was an expert in the way of the sword in the real world. The sword intent that one possessed within the virtual game was the same as the sword intent one had in the real world. Seeing the Sword Emperor charge into the densely packed crowd, as well as the 4 swords circling her as if they were alive, Xianyuan Dao's heart started to beat like crazy. Xianyuan had stepped into the early stages of sword manipulation. When one sword intent became strong to a certain extent, they would be able to manipulate the sword freely without even touching it. However, even within the Xianyuan family's thousands of years of history, very few people had mastered sword manipulation. No one had ever attained that level before the age of 40. The Sword Emperor was not yet even 22 years old. And yet, not only had she mastered sword manipulation, she was simultaneously controlling 4 swords. No, including the one in her hand, that was 5 swords. 5 swords being controlled by her sword intent turned her into a terrifying killing machine, and the ease with which she controlled the swords showed that she was extremely proficient with controlling them like this. Within the Xianyuan family's records, their progenitor lived to 300 years old, and at his peak, he was able to control 7 swords simultaneously. He was a legend that no one in the Xianyuan family could compare to. After the progenitor passed away, out of the very few geniuses who mastered sword manipulation, the most they could control simultaneously was 2 swords. Moreover, despite controlling 2 swords without their hands, they weren't able to wield a 3rd sword with their hands. And yet, the Sword Emperor was well and truly controlling 5 swords. Xianyuan Dao still remembered that the last time he had fought with her, she evidently hadn't achieved sword manipulation yet. In fact, her sword skills were slightly inferior to his, and less than half a year had passed.
Is this real?
Xianyuan Dao muttered to himself, feeling dazed. For her to reach this realm, as her father, he should have felt delighted. However, this sort of growth was simply too monstrous and unbelievable. His shock far surpassed his joy.
During this period, just what happened to you? Could it be that you truly have to cut off all emotions to reach the legendary pinnacle?
The desperate battle behind the battlefield, south of the Azure Forest village, a platform had been constructed, which was tens of meters tall. The revived Long Tianyun returned to the Azure Forest village and was now standing on the platform, watching the situation. The Yin-Huang Alliance's frontline was currently engaged in a vicious battle. The defenders were filled with vigor, and it was the Yin-Huang Alliance's frontline that found themselves beaten back. Moreover, the center of their army was in even more chaos, and Long Tianyun gripped his binoculars as he stared at the unstoppable Sword Emperor massacring within the army. She was a single person wielding 5 swords, killing at least 10 or so people every second. It was as if she wasn't a person, but an invincible army. By now, the The Yin-Huang Alliance's players' spirits were completely broken by the Sword Emperor. Although their soldiers extended as far as the eye could see, almost no one dared to step up. Wherever the Sword Emperor rushed to, the players there would panic and retreat. Seeing this, Long Tianyun's frown became deeper and deeper, and his eyes repeatedly twitched. After following him for so many years, he knew just how powerful she was. However, this Sword Emperor, who had gone missing for many months, seemed extremely unfamiliar. She killed him without any hesitation, and the frightening sword manipulation she displayed was something that he had never seen before. If it weren't for her attire, as well as that unmistakable sword intent, he would have found it difficult to believe that this Sword Emperor and the Sword Emperor he knew before were the same person.
Alliance Master, what should we do? We can't stop the Sword Emperor, and if we keep going like this...
Song Yin put down his binoculars as he spoke in fear. He hadn't dared to fight the Sword Emperor in many years, and he didn't even dare to keep looking at her. Long Tianyun coldly replied,
"Within the virtual world, stamina is unlimited. However, the Sword Emperor is using her sword intent to perform sword manipulation, while her sword intent is supported by her mental energy. Wielding a single sword requires powerful sword intent, and simultaneously wielding 5 swords, the mental energy expenditure every second must be enormous. I'm sure she's unable to last very long. However, those trash at the front are actually retreating."
Long Tianyun picked up his communication device and opened the guild channel as he calmly and coldly spoke, as if he hadn't just died in front of them.
"You've all disappointed me greatly. A battle that should have been easily won has become such an ugly battle. What are you all doing?"
As Long Tianyun's voice sounded in the Yin-Huang Alliance's players' ears, they all hesitated for a moment.
"Use your brains and think. We have 2 million people while they only have 200,000 people, 1/10 of what we have. Fight them 10 to 1. Yes, I died, but does that mean you all died? Let alone dying once. So what if I die 100 times? I'll just immediately revive and take some time getting back."
Your job is to kill all of these people, not worry about my life or death. 2 million people being suppressed by 200,000 people. Just how long are you all going to lose face for my Yin-Huang Alliance?
Long Tianyun's words had the effect of a bucket of cold water being poured on this chaotic army. The players, who had been sent into chaos because of Long Tianyun's death, suddenly realized that this was just the virtual world. After dying, one would respawn. Moreover, they had a 10 to 1 advantage. In battles in the real world, the chief of an army's death would be a massive blow to the soldiers, and could even destroy their fighting spirit. Many instances in history where the army with fewer soldiers had won were when they had killed the enemy's king, causing the enemy to fall into disarray. However, in the virtual world, such a thing didn't exist because even if the chief died, they would be able to respawn. Even if their morale was decreased by a bit, it simply couldn't compare to real life. The Yin-Huang Alliance's frontline regained their morale and started to shift their focus from their alliance master's death to the enemies in front of them. They all gave battle cries as their attacking and defending became more vigorous, causing the battle to become even more intense. The other side's attacks have become fiercer. It looks like the effects from Long Tianyun's death are gone, Li Xiao said as she frowned. That beautiful scene had only lasted for an instant. After all, the difference in strength between the armies was simply too vast. The suppression of the Yin-Huang Alliance was merely a brief illusion, and after that dream was destroyed, they couldn't hide from cruel reality. The Yin-Huang Alliance's commanders all regained their cool and started to organize efficient formations quickly. With 10 times the number of players their enemies had, formations were almost unnecessary. However, the hidden fury within Long Tianyun's voice caused them to feel fearful and ashamed, so they vowed to quickly destroy these people who had forced them to such a state. Under their massive numbers advantage, the Yin-Huang Alliance's attacking line became twice as long, then started to surround the defenders. They attacked them from three sides and started to close in on them. Under the assault from three sides, the Disillusion Alliance and Snow Moon Alliance's players felt many times more pressure. They started to fight 1 against 2, 1 against 3, 1 against 4. Their casualties began to grow as their numbers, which were not big to begin with, began to dwindle.
Maintain the formation. Stand your ground. Even if we die, we can't die for nothing. Drag 1 down with you, and it'll be worth it. Drag 2 down with you, and you'll be a hero.
Yun Feng rushed to the front and dashed left, and right there within the Yin-Huang Alliance's ranks. Even Ling Chen had praised Yun Feng's strength in the past. As the Alliance Master of the Disillusion Alliance, even if he wasn't on the Heaven rankings, he was still in the top 100. By now, he had killed tens of the Yin-Huang Alliance's players. Although he rushed to the front, he didn't lose his rationality and kill recklessly. He efficiently killed enemies, while also paying attention to his safety. After all, if he died, the Disillusion Alliance would fall into chaos for a while. Less than half an hour after the Yin-Huang Alliance had started to formally attack, the Disillusion Alliance and Snow Moon Luan were beaten back. They had been fully suppressed and didn't have an opportunity to breathe. Although she knew that this was the only result, Yunmeng Xian felt quite anxious. Her beautiful hands turned white as she clutched her clothes, seemingly trying to rip her clothing. Winter of that year looked over to Winter of that year and couldn't stand it anymore. He pulled 100 miles of ice as he yelled, "Boss, let's go!" 100 miles of ice nodded and prepared to rush up with Winter of that year. They were standing here to protect Yunmeng Xian and Li Xiao to prevent any Yin-Huang Alliance players from suddenly rushing over here. However, seeing this situation, they were unable to stand by and watch. Although they weren't powerful enough to turn the tides of the battle, they could at least kill a few of the enemies. Wait! Li Xiao stopped them before pulling out a few golden pieces of equipment and handed them over to Winter of that year and 100 miles of ice.
You haven't upgraded your equipment after reaching LV50. Yunmeng Xian asked me a long time ago to find some equipment suitable for you. These are all gold-grade equipment, and although they're not good enough for people of your strength, but they're compatible with your professions. Good luck.
Comparatively to the copper-grade equipment they had, these sets of gold equipment were like godly equipment to them, making them much more powerful. The two of them did not refuse and quickly donned the equipment. Winter of that year gripped his new gold-grade bow as he said earnestly to Yunmeng Xian,
"Big sister goddess, even if the new city is destroyed, at least we still have the people. As long as the people haven't died, the new city can be rebuilt and hope will not be lost. As such, no matter what happens, you must stay strong. The fairies, dwarves, and all of us will be with you to build an even bigger city. Don't worry. Even if I can't protect the new city, I'll protect you."
After saying this, Winter of that year didn't stay any longer and rushed towards the battlefield.
"Many thanks."
100 miles of ice spoke 2 short words before also rushing off. 100 miles of ice and Winter of that year were like 2 sharp swords stabbing into the body of the Yin-Huang Alliance's army, giving them great pain. Once a heaven-ranking expert's strength matured, they would be able to take down 1,000 people by themselves. The emotionless swordsman 100 miles of ice was naturally one of those people. He rushed into the Yin-Huang Alliance's army, and wherever his golden sword passed, players would fall. He couldn't clear out massive waves of players like the Sword Emperor, but the speed at which he killed was still quite frightening. Compared to 100 miles of ice, Winter of that year was much more shameless. With his range as a marksman, Winter of that year started to shoot at the enemy's front lines, where they couldn't attack him. When players started to run towards him, he would immediately flee. His incredible speed made even the Shadowless completely flabbergasted. When the players gave up chasing him, he would instead start chasing them while shooting, all the while maintaining a safe distance. If you don't move, I'll shoot you. If you chase me, I'll shoot while running. If you run, I'll chase you while shooting. Rather than being shot to death, the people who died from his assaults were more so killed from anger. With winter of that year and 100 miles of ice joining the battle, only Mu Bingyao was left behind to protect Yun Meng Xian and Li Xiao Shui. With the Frozen Heart Maneater, who was ranked 5th on the heaven rankings, standing there, no one dared to come near.
Meng Xian, what do you think about winter of that year and 100 miles of ice?
Li Xiao Shui suddenly asked as she watched the battle that was becoming more and more desperate.
They're my, as well as the new city's benefactors.
Yun Meng Xian replied sincerely.
They're very mysterious. I've tried to investigate them, but I couldn't find anything. It was as if these two people suddenly appeared in the world.
Li Xiao Shui said.
However, they bear no ill will towards us, and are very reliable. If we can make it past today, let's ask them to stay in the new city. I'm sure that with your invitation, they won't refuse. After all,
Li Xiao Shui gave a smile that didn't seem like a smile.
That little brother Winter of that year is infatuated with you.
Yun Meng Xian.
Shao Qi's return. 1. Yun Meng Xian already knew what Li Xiao Shui had just said. Back then she had revealed her true appearance because she wanted to use her looks to make Winter of that year and 100 miles of ice promise not to divulge the secret of the new city. However, unexpectedly, not only did Winter of that year promise not to tell anyone about the new city, but had even volunteered to stand guard. What shocked her, even more, was that Winter of that year was powerful enough to defeat even Song Yan easily. However, it was just that. There was no night in the Mystic Moon world. Although it was nearly midnight in the real world, the sun still hung in the sky within the virtual world. As the battle became more and more intense, it seemed as if the sea of people in front of the new city had started to rise in temperature and boil. Both sides brimmed with bloodlust. They didn't know how long they had been fighting for, and some even forgot why they were there. The only thing on their minds was to kill the people in front of them. The piercing yells of their commanders were utterly drowned out by the roars and shouts of the attackers and defenders. Within the chaotic battle, corpses piled up incredibly quickly, as there were more and more casualties. Fervor and bloodlust now replaced the nervousness within everyone's hearts, and they all gave up retreating and evading, as they used their strongest skills against any enemies. As such, the corpses gathered more and more quickly, greatly surpassing the speed at which the bodies disappeared and returned to the main city. Many of the people who died decided not to go back to the main city immediately, but stared at the individual who killed them, remembering their face, and watched until that person was killed. Only then did they leave. The corpses began to take over the battlefield, but the fighting did not slow down at all. There was more and more equipment gathering on the ground, but not a single person picked them up. In China's history, there had been very few battles on a scale of millions of people. However, within the virtual world, it was incredibly easy to gather people. Simply sending an announcement on the guild channel would ensure that almost all people heard the call to gather. This was the same for the actual transport. A single teleport scroll could transport a person thousands of kilometers in a single instant. As such, it was not that rare to see battles with millions of people in the virtual world. Once such battles reached their climax, they were no less intense than massive battles in the real world. The Yin Huang Alliance's army had started to completely suppress the Disillusion Alliance and Snow Moon Lowlands players, who were unable to even breathe. The Yin Huang Alliance had now completely surrounded the defenders, totally blocking off any retreat. They could neither advance nor retreat. However, not a single person attacked the city. They all reveled in the slaughter of the defenders. After all, the Yin Huang Alliance's alliance master had ordered that before destroying the city, They were to engage in a banquet of massacre. The Disillusion Alliance and Snow Moon Lowlands players knew that they wouldn't survive, and were filled with bloodlust. The more they were forced into dire straits, the less fear they felt. No matter if it was man or woman, all of them gave off an air of bloodthirstiness as they disregarded their lives and charged at the Yin Huan Alliance's players. Since they had to die, they would each take down another person with them. If this were in the real world, the green grass would have long since been dyed red with fresh blood, which would have created streams and rivers. The stench of blood and gore would have reached up to the heavens. In the north, some of the guilds continued to watch, and none of them made a move. The heaven-shaking roars and yells hadn't stopped at all for the past hour or so, making them feel as if they were going to go deaf. However, not a single one of them had become accustomed to that scene or those sounds. Every scene deeply shook their hearts. They never thought that the battle for the new city, which should have been incredibly simple, would turn out like this. If Long Tianyun had directly ordered the Yin Huang Alliance to destroy the city, it would have been almost obliterated by now. However, the fighting continued while the new city was left untouched, and was almost forgotten. The Disillusion Alliance and Snow Moon Lulan are almost finished. What a pity, one of the bosses of the guild said in a low voice as he shook his head. The Disillusion Alliance and Snow Moon Lulan had evidently moved out all of their forces. What did it mean for every player in a guild to go down a level and drop their equipment? They would suffer an incredibly heavy loss. After this battle, it was likely that the Disillusion Alliance and Snow Moon Lulan would take a long time to recover. However, the losses to the Yin Huang Alliance would be quite insignificant. They know they were facing the Yin Huang Alliance, and yet they continue to defend it. Isn't that the same as suicide? It doesn't matter too much about the Snow Moon Lulan. Even if they were disbanded, it wouldn't matter much to Xiao Shui. However, the Disillusion Alliance is different. When do we act? Of course, when the Yin Huang Alliance starts to destroy the city. We'll help them with that. Afterwards, to whose hands the city creation token falls will depend on their abilities. At least for now, it's best that everyone just stands by. If someone makes a move now and draws the attention of the Sword Emperor. Thinking to there, the 10 or so bosses of the large guilds gathered together shuddered as they looked at where the Sword Emperor was. An hour had passed, but the Sword Emperor was still within the Yin Huang Alliance's backline. The aura she gave off was that if a god blocked her, she would kill a god. If a Buddha blocked her, she would kill a Buddha. She didn't have any allies, only 5 swords, and yet she hadn't died after such a long time, because no one could approach her without dying. Chi. The 4 flying swords looked like a meat grinder as they ended another 10 or so Yin Huang Alliance players' lives. After seeing the Sword Emperor draw near, the surrounding players didn't think even to attack, and all rushed back in fear. At that moment, the Sword Emperor suddenly slowed down, and her body unnaturally swayed as she stumbled back by 2 steps. She fell on one knee, as her arms dropped to her sides, and the 4 silver swords fell from the air. Just as the surrounding players stared in shock, a gigantic gray shadow appeared next to the Sword Emperor. The Sword Emperor stabbed the ground with her sword and jumped onto the lightning falcon, which gave a cry as it shot into the air. In the distance, Long Tianyun put down his binoculars as he picked up his communication device, saying in a low voice, "All marksmen, shoot that gray bird." While in battle, to be able to receive orders, everyone had their communication devices on. Long Tianyun's voice sounded into every marksman's ears. They all looked up as they shot towards the gray shadow. Marksman's specialty was shooting enemies high in the sky. Before the lightning falcon could rush to its highest altitude, it was faced with a wave of arrows. It spread its wings, protecting its owner on its back. It took most of the arrows, and right before it reached safety, it was unable to hold on anymore. The lightning falcon cried out as its HP was cleared out, and it fell, then turned into a gray light that returned to the Sword Emperor's pet space. The Sword Emperor's body tumbled through the air as a second wave of arrows shot towards her. Without the lightning falcon, despite being the Sword Emperor, she was unable to defend herself completely and could only wait for death. In this sort of situation, unless she had heaven-defying HP or defense, she was doomed to die. However, the Sword Emperor was the Sword Emperor. Although she was completely exhausted, she wouldn't be done in by these ordinary players so easily. Her hand suddenly moved as a sword appeared and hovered beneath her feet. She jumped high off this sword, causing the arrows to miss. The sword then flew up, and the Sword Emperor stood on the sword as she quickly sped to the south. No matter if it was the speed or altitude, the Yin Huang Alliance's players could only stare in absolute shock. Flying on a sword was something that only happened in Xiao movies, and yet it was occurring right in front of their eyes. Seeing the Sword Emperor speed away, Long Tianyun coldly harumphed and smashed the binoculars in his hands to the ground. Song Yen didn't say anything as he hurriedly handed Long Tianyun another pair.
Xiao Shui, how many people do we still have?
Yun Meng Xian did her best to remain calm, but her voice slightly trembled. Li Xiaoshui fell silent for a moment before sighing and replying.
The Disillusion Alliance has lost 60,000 players, and the Snow Moon Luan has lost 38,000. Moreover, the speed at which they're dying is becoming faster and faster.
The Yin Huang Alliance's casualties weren't any less than the Disillusion Alliance's and the Snow Moon Alliance's. However, the Yin Huang Alliance could afford these losses, while the Disillusion Alliance and Snow Moon Luan couldn't. With almost the same casualties, the Yin Huang Alliance was drawing closer and closer to their goal, while the defenders were coming closer and closer to annihilation. The more people died, the faster the remaining players would die. Before, it was 2 people facing 20 people on average. However, now, it was 1 person facing 19 people on average. The speed at which they were dying became faster and faster. Yun Meng Xian's body swayed as her body felt incredibly light.
Has there been any news from Ling Tian? No. Tian has remained by his side the entire time. If he wakes up, she'll let me know immediately.
Yun Meng Xian looked up towards the sky, unable to look at the bitter battle anymore. She absent-mindedly muttered,
Xiao Shui, do you think I was wrong? You told me that Ling Tian might not appear, but I bet that he would come back. Because of that, I dragged in Big Brother and your Snow Moon Luan. And now, the result. The city won't be able to be defended, and I even dragged down you and Big Brother. No, of course you weren't wrong.
Li Xiaoshui smiled and shook her head.
If I were you, I would have done the same thing. The new city is something we might protect. Even if there's only a 1 in a billion chance of it surviving, as long as it stands, we need to protect it. Meng Xian, what you did was right. Not only are you not in the wrong, but you also made an outstanding decision.
As she spoke, Li Xiaoshui looked up in the air, and immediately saw the Sword Emperor shooting towards them. The Sword Emperor shot towards the south on her sword, flying above where Li Xiaoshui and Yun Meng Xian were after leaving the battlefield. Her unshakable self suddenly swayed as she finally couldn't hold on anymore and fell. Crash! The Sword Emperor fell heavily onto the ground but immediately got up, looking around her. After only seeing Li Xiaoshui, Yun Meng Xian, and Mu Bingyao, she relaxed and heavily leaned against the wall of vines, not moving at all as her chest heaved. Long Tianyun was entirely correct. Simultaneously controlling 5 swords took a massive toll on the Sword Emperor's mind, and she had reached her absolute limit. After the Lightning Falcon died, she had used the remnants of her sword intent to reach this place. If she had left any later, she would have died there. However, in this state of utter exhaustion, she would not be able to fight for a long time.
Sword Emperor?
The Sword Emperor's descent from the sky caused Yun Meng Xian and Li Xiao to be entirely shocked, and they both cried out. Li Xiao immediately realized what sort of condition the Sword Emperor was in, and after looking around, she found that no one was chasing after the Sword Emperor. Only then did she heave a sigh of relief. The Sword Emperor was simply too fast, and no one could catch up to her. This place was quite far from the battlefield, and adding on the fact that everyone was fighting with all of their might, no one noticed that the Sword Emperor had come over here. Perhaps they saw but didn't dare to come over. The trampled Yin Huang Alliance players, who had been praying for this god of killing to leave quickly, now no longer wanted to go to their deaths, despite the Sword Emperor leaving.
The Sword Emperor isn't strong for no reason, nor is she limitless. She's already completely exhausted,
Wu Bingyao said. She understood why the Sword Emperor had suddenly left the battlefield and was in such a state. Physical stamina was unlimited in the virtual world because it was a virtual body. However, the mental energy they used was their own mental energy. For her to use her mental energy like that for so long, the Sword Emperor had reached her absolute limit. She was now incredibly dizzy and numb, and couldn't even move her hands and feet. She would only be able to recover from this after an extended period of rest. Yun Meng Xian nodded and looked towards the Sword Emperor sitting there, unmoving. She mustered up her courage and walked over as she said,
"Big brother, Sword Emperor, although I don't know why, thank you for helping us again."
The Sword Emperor did not respond, nor did she move. In order to kill even more people, she needed to recover as quickly as possible. Under normal circumstances, the sword chi around the Sword Emperor's body made those who were close to her feel a chill and caused them to tremble involuntarily. However, the current Sword Emperor barely had any sword intent left and didn't have her typical imposing aura. After waiting a while, Yun Meng Xian did not receive a reply from the Sword Emperor. She took out a bottle of Dew of Dawn and took a step forwards.
"Big brother Sword Emperor, this is..."
Whoosh! Bang! Just as Yun Meng Xian stepped out, the flowing red clouds sword suddenly drew a cold arc and landed right in front of Yun Meng Xian, mere millimeters away from the tip of her foot. Yun Meng Xian took a great fight and cried with surprise as she retreated, almost falling over. The Sword Emperor didn't move at all and remained completely silent. Li Xiao hurriedly came over to support Yun Meng Xian as she shook her head.
"The Sword Emperor doesn't allow anyone to go close. Just let the Sword Emperor properly rest."
Yun Meng Xian, who had taken a great fright, glanced at the Sword Emperor as she lightly nodded. She then walked away with Li Xiao, not daring to approach the Sword Emperor again. The flowing red clouds sword remained stabbed into the ground, as silent as its owner. By now, the tides of the battle had completely turned in the Yin Huang Alliance's players' favor, as they started to steamroll over the defenders. In the beginning, there was a 10:1 difference in numbers, but now that difference was 20:1. With such a massive difference in strength, the Yin Huang Alliance could easily surround the defenders and destroy them. Without exerting much effort, they had surrounded the defenders, making it impossible for them to escape. Under such circumstances, the deaths of the Disillusion Alliance and Snow Moon Mulan's players was just a matter of time. Far away on the platform, Long Tianyun put down his binoculars, uninterested in watching anymore. Although this conclusion was something that was unchangeable, he was very displeased with how everything had gone. The Sword Emperor's appearance made it so that the defenders, who should have been easily massacred, actually suppressed the Yin Huang Alliance's army for a short while. Moreover, for his heavy cavalry to be annihilated like that was a great humiliation.
"Shadow, how are the casualties?"
Long Tianyun coldly asked as he looked into the distance. Flame Shadow, who had just finished going through the numbers, immediately replied,
As of 1 minute ago, we've lost 120,000 players. Possibly a bit more than the other side.
What?
120,000.
Long Tianyun deeply frowned. Within the virtual world, the casualties were always far greater than in real life. However, Long Tianyun never expected that they would suffer 120,000 casualties.
This, young master, please stay calm.
Flame Shadow hurriedly spoke.
The Sword Emperor's appearance caused the heavy cavalry to go into a mass panic, and nearly 1,000 people trampled each other to death. During the chaos, the other side rushed up, causing heavy casualties. Also, within the 120,000 deaths, 16,000 were killed by the Sword Emperor.
Long Tianyun suddenly turned to face Flame Shadow, his gaze like a piercing knife.
16,000 people. Are you sure you're not joking? It's very difficult to believe, but this number is accurate.
Flame Shadow could feel cold sweat running down his head. He knew why Long Tianyun had reacted this way. Back then, the Sword Emperor had been incredibly powerful and could single-handedly take down 1,000 players. However, 1 against 10,000 was simply impossible. Apart from the monstrous Eve in the West, no one could accomplish such a feat, and yet, the Sword Emperor they had seen today, in a mere hour, had killed over 10,000 people. Killing 16,000 people in 1 hour meant that on average, 4 or 5 people died every second from her swords. Moreover, she had continuously fought without any support. After today, the Sword Emperor's name would have a new meaning. The Sword Emperor had become tens of times more powerful, and perhaps she would be able to defeat Ling Tian. However, she no longer belonged to the Yin-Huang Alliance, and instead had attacked the Yin-Huang Alliance. Long Tianyun simply couldn't accept this.
SSS.
Long Tianyun sucked in a mouthful of cold air as he waved his hand, spitefully saying,
Even if she's 100 times stronger, she can only kill a few of our people. Is she so naive to think that she can protect that city? Tell the frontline that I've run out of patience, and I want them all to die. Roger.
Flame Shadow nodded, then picked up his communication device as he yelled,
All commanders, listen up. Everyone is to attack immediately. Don't allow these small fries to waste the Alliance Master's time and test his patience. Understood?
Once this order was given out, the pressure on the Disillusion Alliance and Snow Moon Luan became countless times greater. Yun Feng rushed to the front, and numerous enemies fell by his sword. By now, he had lost all hope and had become half-crazed. Every attack was incredibly savage and took a life each time. He completely disregarded defending, and whenever he faced a crisis, there would always be a player from the Disillusion Alliance to block the fatal blow for him. Looking at the incredibly dense encirclement, as well as the Disillusion Alliance's dwindling numbers, he raised his head to the sky and heavily sighed. Yun Feng then viciously roared and rushed up again. The Yin-Huang Alliance's encirclement shrank smaller and smaller, meaning that the Disillusion Alliance and Snow Moon Luan's numbers were becoming fewer and fewer. When the casualties reached 130,000 with less than 100,000 people left, Yun Meng Xian finally sighed, as she said dispiritedly,
He still hasn't come. Could this be the heaven's will? It's just that. I can't accept this ending with the hope I've given to the fairies and dwarves.
Li Xiaoshui's eyes started to tremble as she looked at the current situation. She knew that time did not permit her to hesitate anymore, and she turned to Yun Meng Xian as she said,
Meng Xian, actually.
Just as Li Xiaoshui was about to speak, an abnormally hot gust of wind blew over, as a crimson-red glow appeared in the sky. Li Xiaoshui and Yun Meng Xian subconsciously looked up, and just as they raised their heads, A gigantic red shadow flew from the south over the wall of vines, appearing above them. Seeing that crimson-red shadow, Meng Xian was completely stunned. Although she hadn't seen her many times, her feathers were simply too beautiful. It was likely that there could not be found in the world any feathers more beautiful. Anyone who saw her would be utterly surprised, and would never forget about her.
Ling? Ling!
Meng Xian couldn't help but cry out. Although Ling was much bigger than she remembered, that incredibly beautiful appearance couldn't be anyone but Ling. Meng Xian's heart started rapidly thumping. Ling was Ling Tian's pet, and had disappeared for a long time. Now that Ling had appeared here, could it be that Ling Tian would come soon? As Meng Xian called out, Ling slowed down, then started flying in circles above where Meng Xian was, and let out a shrill cry. Evidently, she still recognized Meng Xian. On her back, a young girl's face poked over looking at Meng Xian as she yelled in delight.
Big sister Meng Xian, it's you! Chi? Is that you, Chi?
Looking at the incredibly familiar girl who had left for a long time, Meng Xian almost couldn't believe her eyes. She never thought that she would be reunited with her here. Moreover, she was overjoyed that she was back. She was back. It was already past the time that the doctors forecasted for her death, and she was back. Ling quickly descended. Before she reached the ground, the girl impatiently jumped off and rushed towards Meng Xian, jumping up and down with happiness as she hugged her.
Big sister Meng Xian, I've finally met you again. I'm so happy. So glad. Woo, after such a long time, I nearly missed you all to death. Woo.
After laughing in joy, Xiao started to cry as she hugged Meng Xian. Ever since Meng Xian and Shura had become good sisters, it was the first time that they had separated for so long. She missed them more and more, day by day, which spurred her to do her best to complete the inheritance as soon as possible to leave the lava purgatory. She desperately wanted to meet the people close to her, and put their hearts at ease. Meng Xian's eyes were also full of tears.
It's great to see you safely returned.
The sisters tightly embraced for a long time, and completely forgot about the desperate battle, as well as the battle cries and yells. After Heart's dream had been destroyed, they had gone their separate ways. Now that they were reunited, there was too much that they wanted to say to each other. However, the circumstances didn't allow them too much time for that. Fire Purgatory 1. A Dark World. The girl in Ling Chen's arms fell silent for a while, and he lightly walked as he looked down at this pure white maiden. Her long, white hair gave a dreamlike sensation, and her small face was millions of times cuter than the cutest doll. She rested the entire weight of her body in Ling Chen's arms, and lay against his chest. Her arms were wrapped around his neck, and naturally fell against his shoulders. Her eyes were peacefully closed, snow-white eyelashes against her pale cheeks, as her small nose and white lips gently moved with each breath. It took much of Ling Chen's self-control not to lower his head and kiss her as he softly asked,
Sha, are you asleep?
Nope. Unexpectedly, Sha immediately answered him with her eyes closed. When she spoke, her lips upturned in a smile, and her body gently moved, shifting into a more comfortable position.
Then why aren't you talking anymore?
Because it feels very comfortable and peaceful lying in Ling Chen's arms. Ling Chen smiled warmly. Even he was surprised by how warm his smile was. Hugging Sha gave him a sense of peace and comfort. He would only feel this sort of sensation while holding Shura. After Shura escaped from the Isrock disease, Ling Chen felt, while he hugged her, he had the whole world in his arms. He felt so at peace and relaxed that he had no more regrets in the world. He had fallen for Shura at first sight, and their feelings for each other had grown over the past 6 years. However, It was the first time he had met this girl called Sha, and yet she gave him this sort of feeling, which was simply incomprehensible to him. However, Ling Chen knew this feeling was incredibly real because his feelings would not be able to trick him. The only explanation was this girl had a magical charm to her.
Chi-Chi, why have you come here? Why didn't you tell us that you were fine first? We've been worried about you the whole time.
Looking at Xiao in front of her, much of Meng Xian's despair about the new city disappeared. Indeed, what better news than that of Xiao safely coming back? No matter how important the new city was, it was still doomed. How could it compare to Xiao's safety?
I only just left that place because I wanted to come with Ling, but Ling can't use teleport scrolls, so I asked Ling to fly me here. That way, I could enjoy the sensation of flying as much as possible, and I wanted to come back secretly to give you a surprise. Who would have thought that I would meet you here? Ah, that's right. Big Sister Meng Xian, what are you doing here? And what's going on over there?
Xiao still looked the same, but the feeling she gave off was entirely different from before. This was mainly due to her large eyes. They seemed full of spirit, and also contained a faint red light. She was wearing a set of red equipment, from her headgear to earrings, clothes, gloves, her ring, and her shoes. They were all completely red. Moreover, it wasn't a festive, celebratory red, but a burning red color. This was especially true for her clothes. When people looked at them, they would find it difficult to avert their eyes. It seemed to be a full-body battle gown, and was covered with flame-like magic inscriptions. Those inscriptions were not simple at all, and if one looked at them for a while, they would feel the inscriptions were moving around like fire, giving off a burning sensation. A phoenix-like bird was embroidered on the abdomen. When looking at it, one would feel a suppressing sense of might, and at the back of the gown, 10 or so phoenix-like tail feathers were attached, looking incredibly beautiful. Every inch of the battle gown stuck tightly to Xiao's body, and the shape of her two large breasts, as well as her hips, could be seen. She looked not only heroic, but also wild and sexy. Xiao's figure was incredibly sensual, and adding on her beautiful looks, anyone's eyes would be fixed on her once they looked. She brought out the full charm of this battle gown, as if it was made especially for her. When Xiao and Meng Xian tightly embraced, Li Xiaoshui's gaze was fixed on Xiao's battle gown. Her eyes lit with desire. She didn't know what this battle gown was called or where it came from, but she was certain that it was no ordinary piece of equipment.
It's Long Tianyun. He wants to destroy our city.
In response to Xiao's question, Meng Xian gave a heavy and powerless reply.
Our city?
Xiao's eyes stared wide open as she exclaimed,
Could it be that this city, it's ours?
Meng Xian smiled.
Ling Tian obtained the city creation token and gave it, as well as many other things, to me. Together, with Xiao Shui and many other people's help, our new city's nearly completed. However, in the final few days before completion, we were discovered by Long Tianyun, so...
After listening to them, Xiao more or less understood the situation. Mystic Moon wasn't the first virtual game she had been in, and she knew just how important the city creation token was. She understood the necessity of secretly building a city, as well as the consequences of this city being discovered by Long Tianyun. With her good sister back by her side, Meng Xian, who had suppressed her emotions all this time, could finally let them out. She told Xiao about the process of the construction of the new city, which included the fairy clan's hope and the dwarf clan's future. She told Xiao about how the new city had been discovered, and how Ling Tian still had not appeared, as well as the Disillusion Alliance and Snow Moon Luan sacrificing themselves to stop the Yin Huang Alliance. She also told her about the Sword Emperor's help. However, they had still fallen into these desperate straits. Xiao understood everything. Her excited heart settled down, and she became serious, her spirited eyes becoming concerned. She had completed the inheritance at a speed which even surprised the vermilion bird and had taken less than half a year in total. She had excitedly returned to meet with the people she had continually missed, as well as to put their hearts at ease and share in her happiness. However, she would never have thought she would be faced with such a desperate situation on the very first day she returned. At the same time, she felt quite happy. Thank goodness I wasn't too late. No matter what the result is, at least I made it back in time and can face this together with Meng Xian. At least she won't have to face this by herself. This new city contains her blood, sweat, and tears, and she's given everything for this new city. If this new city is destroyed, she'll suffer a massive blow. At least in the worst-case scenario, I can help her bear this. No! We can't let this worst-case scenario happen. Xiao turned and looked to the north as her eyes flashed with a faint red light. The vermilion bird's eyes of flames allowed her to see extremely far away. However, all she could see was a sea of the Yin Huang Alliance's players, and almost no Disillusion Alliance or Snow Moon Luan players. This was because they were completely suppressed, and there were barely any of them left. Xiao bit her lips as she gently held Yun Meng Xian's hands. She suddenly turned around and jumped on Xi Ling's back as she pointed towards the north.
Xi Ling, please take me over there.
Xi Ling gave a low cry as she flapped her wings. Yun Meng Xian hurried over as she asked,
Chi, where are you going? To go beat those bad guys who want to destroy our new home. Don't do it. It's far too dangerous. Don't worry, big sister Meng Xian.
Xiao smiled as she flew away with Xi Ling.
I'm not that same Chi who needed everyone to protect her. It's time for me to protect our new home. I'll do my best and will keep myself safe.
Xi Ling currently wasn't a pet and was completely free. Back when Ling Chen had sent Xi Ling to the lava purgatory, the vermilion bird's first condition was for Ling Chen to cancel the soul contract between Xi Ling and himself. Afterwards, Xi Ling returned from being a pet to being a boss. This was because the vermilion bird didn't want a sovereign-level being like Xi Ling to become someone's pet. It wanted her to regain her freedom and not be bound by anyone. If she still wanted to be Ling Chen's pet, that was her choice. It was only because Xi Ling wasn't a pet anymore that she could leave Ling Chen and stay at the lava purgatory. However, because she was no longer a pet and was a kind beast, she was unable to take the initiative to attack players. Otherwise, if she killed players who did not attack her, she would become an evil beast. Only after she became a pet would she be able to fight whenever her master wished. However, there weren't any restrictions for her against flying Xiao to her destination and protecting her. In her optimal condition, Xi Ling could fly extremely quickly, and she soon arrived at the battlefield. 50 meters above the battlefield was an extremely safe distance, and looking down at the densely gathered Yin Huang Alliance, Xiao stretched out her right hand as a crimson-red, strangely shaped magic staff appeared in her grasp. This staff was called Vermilion Death, and was shaped from the vermilion bird's bones, forged using the vermilion bird's soul flames. It significantly increased the damage of any fire magic attack. When Vermilion Death appeared, the vermilion bird's battle gown lit up with a red light, as the fiery inscriptions became real flames, burning wildly on Xiaoqi's body. Xiaoqi raised the Vermilion Death, and as she moved her arm, 3 fist-sized balls of flame fell downwards.
I'll burn all you bad guys!
The 3 balls of flame were a shocking red color, and there was not a hint of yellowness within them. However, because they were too small, no one on the chaotic battlefield noticed them. Even if players did see them, they would immediately look away and not take them to heart. After all, those small balls of flame looked like low-level fire spells. However, no one could have thought that these 3 seemingly ordinary balls of flame were the most powerful, hot, and holy flames on the forgotten continent, the vermilion bird's flames. Fire Purgatory 2. The 3 balls of flame quickly fell, unnoticed, towards 3 different places. Just as they hit the ground, the 3 fist-sized balls of fire suddenly exploded out with a deafening boom as 3 areas that were 10 or so meters long were devoured by flames. In the north, Long Tianyun's hand, which held the binoculars, slightly trembled because within his field of vision 3 crimson-red dots had appeared. In a battle with millions of people, the battlefield was incredibly large, and yet the explosions from those 3 fireballs were still quite visible. They immediately attracted Long Tianyun's attention, and even Song Yin by his side cried out,
"What is that?"
"Boom! Boom! Boom!" Countless players cried out in fear and shock. The explosion from the 3 balls of flame mercilessly devoured 3 massive crowds of players. On this battlefield packed with people, there were at least 10 players within range of the balls of fire. Tens of people were caught up in the explosions, and could only cry out as they died. It didn't matter if they were warriors, archers, shield-bearers, or mages. Even flame wizards, who possessed extremely high resistances to fire, died in an instant. No one could last another second within those flames. If these flames couldn't insta-kill players around the same level, how could they deserve to be called the Vermilion Bird's flames? The 3 fireballs exploded as terrifying flames swept at the players around them, causing mass panic. They guessed this was some high-grade skill scroll or a high-grade attack item. However, they never thought it could be just a normal attack which, if the caster had enough MP, could be cast an unlimited number of times. Whoosh! In the air, Xiao once again swung her staff as another 3 fist-sized balls of flame were thrown down towards the Yin Huang Alliance players. Another 3 explosions sounded as another 3 regions were cleared out, and 30 or so players were insta-killed. Xiaoqi's eyebrows raised slightly as she continuously attacked. Boom! 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 Every time Xiao attacked, she would cause 3 explosions, which would insta-kill a large crowd of Yin Huang Alliance players. The terrified Yin Huang Alliance players all looked up and found the source of these fiery explosions. There was a large, crimson-red bird flying around above them, and there was a young girl dressed in red. The balls of flames came from her. Boom! 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 Xiaoqi's attacks were incredibly fast. Every 3 seconds she could attack roughly twice. As Ling slowly flew around, the fireballs were scattered throughout the Yin Huang Alliance's army, blowing the Yin Huang Alliance players to Kingdom Come and scaring them to death. Attacking twice every 3 seconds and killing at least 30 or so players with each attack. This was even faster than the Sword Emperor. Through his binoculars, Long Tianyun watched the balls of flame continuously explode within his troops like grenades, quickly taking their lives. Long Tianyun's frown became deeper and deeper as he asked in a low voice,
"Who is this person? Surely it's an NPC."
Song Yin hesitantly replied,
"NPCs are unable to participate in this battle. That's a player. Moreover, what she's using evidently isn't an item, but magic attacks."
Long Tianyun said as he ground his teeth in fury.
"What? That's impossible."
Song Yan's hands trembled as his face slightly twisted.
"It must be some type of attack item. They'll definitely run out of supplies soon. No second upgrade skill can release that kind of fire magic. I, Song Yan, am the most powerful fire mage. How could anyone be stronger than me with fire magic? Even if there is, how could we not know about them? Humph. Of course, it's not impossible."
Long Tianyun said with a dark expression, as waves of shock were sent through his heart. attacking 3 different places at once, and with such a large range and terrifying power. What was even more terrifying was these ultimate level abilities were being cast with almost no cooldown time at all. When had such a fearsome fire mage appeared in China? Long Tianyun picked up his communication device as he roared.
Assemble the strongest hunters and tell them to investigate all of the information about that person.
Long Tianyun immediately received a reply full of fear.
WEV already investigated her. Her name is Q Chi Chi, but we couldn't find any information on her profession. This name seems to be
Q Chi Chi. Long Tianyun paused in shock before his eyes widened.
Xiao? Chi Hao? How could it be her? What the hell's going on?
Long Tianyun muttered to himself in shock. He never expected this monstrous fire mage was the Xiao family's princess, who he had never taken seriously. His expression darkened as he roared.
Who cares who she is? Have you trash all died? Hurry up and kill her! Can't you see how much damage she's causing us every second she's alive? But she's too high. She's at least 50 meters in the sky, and no one can attack her.
The voice in the communication device hurriedly replied. Flying pets were quite rare, and only 1 out of a few thousand players would have one. Moreover, most of these pets could fly a maximum of 20 meters in the air, and some could fly a maximum of 30 meters in the air. There were essentially no pets that could fly above this point. This was because regular marksmen had a range of 30 meters, and in order to make the game balanced, the system set the flying limit for the vast majority of pets to 30 meters. However, Xiao Qi, while flying on her pet, was able to fly 50 meters in the air. Even if the Yin Huang Alliance's players cried and wailed as much as they wanted, they wouldn't be able to do anything to her.
Idiots!
Long Tianyun furiously replied.
Gather all of the players with flying pets and get them to temporarily transfer them to the strongest marksman so they can shoot her out of the air. Understood? You understood. The Alliance Master is truly wise. Hurry up and go. Roger.
While Long Tianyun responded in shock and fury, the other bosses of the large guilds were completely dumbfounded. They watched the red shadow in the air, as well as the continuous attacks she was raining down, as they heard their hearts loudly thump. Who was this person? When did such a monstrous player appear in China? What skill was that? No matter the range, AoE or direct, they were all unbelievable.
Hurry! Send people to investigate that person. Immediately go and find that person's name. It should be a woman, but the only women on the heaven rankings are the Frozen-Hearted Man-Eater and the Luan Queen. Who is this person? Hurry up and find out who that person is. After the Sword Emperor left, another monster appeared. It seems that she's no weaker than the Sword Emperor. Goddamn! The Sword Emperor's already helping the new city, and if we offend both of these people, Xiao Qi's attacks from the sky were simply too overwhelming and caused the bosses of the large guilds to feel a deep sense of fear. None of them could sit still, and all of them were desperate to find out her identity. When they heard the name Q Chi Chi, they were all completely dumbfounded. They were not unfamiliar with this name. However, they had not paid much attention to this name either. They were only somewhat familiar with it because it was the Battle Alliance's Alliance Master's little sister. This girl entered the virtual world quite early on, and apart from her stunning looks, there was not much else about her. Real world, Beijing, ding. The game bracelet on his wrist sounded out. Xiao Qiufeng looked down, and after hesitating he answered. A voice hurriedly spoke, and just from the 2 sentences, Xiao Qiufeng's body froze as his hands started to shake emotionally. After ending the call, Xiao Qiufeng charged into the living room and hurriedly turned on the screen. Needless to say, it was currently broadcasting the battle for the new city. Xiao Qiufeng quickly flicked through the scenes until his gaze fell on a red figure. Chi-Chi! Chi-Chi! After muttering her name, Xiao Feng started to laugh. The cold magistrate actually laughed. If this news spread, many people would be shocked to death. Even Yun Feng, who knew him for over 10 years, had never seen him laugh before. Xiao Feng stood as his expression became incredibly resolute. He called the Battle Alliance's commanders through his game bracelet as he said, "I want everyone gathered north of the Azure Forest village in 3 minutes. Everyone in the entire guild, not a single person less. If anyone doesn't show up, regardless of excuse, they'll be kicked from the Battle Alliance." Fire Purgatory 3. That's Chi-Chi. Looking at the red figure in the sky, Yun Meng Xian's mouth fell wide open, and she was unable to believe her eyes. That girl in red had flown over the Yin Huang Alliance, and every time she attacked 3 fiery explosions burst forth, bringing disaster to the Yin Huang Alliance. Was this really the incredibly weak ice mage who had to rely on Mu Bingyao and Suer's attacks and Shui Rua's protection to level up? Before, you told me that she went to the south by herself. Looks like she went to an incredible place and experienced some amazing things. Li Xiaoshui's face was also full of shock. Although Xiaoqi relied on Ling to stay high in the air, away from attacks, the speed at which she killed enemy troops was not at all inferior to the Sword Emperor. When she left, she said she decided to trust Ling Tian's words to go and search for a possible hope. Yun Meng Xian looked towards the red figure far away as she said in a soft voice, "Not only did she find hope, she also found a miracle. This is great." Xiaoqi's attacks caused the Yin Huang Alliance to suffer greatly, and their entire army was once again thrown into disarray. They were faced with the fear of 3 massive bombs every second. In such a densely gathered crowd, trying to evade these attacks was almost impossible. What was even worse was they couldn't even counterattack, and could only passively receive the attacks, pitifully crying out. Yun Feng's eyes were red with bloodlust, and his earth-splitting slash simultaneously killed the 3 players who had been attacking him together for a while. He drew ragged breaths as he looked at Xiaoqi, who was bringing fear and desolation to the Yin Huang Alliance's army. He wiped his mouth as he chuckled, saying to himself, "Not only did she return, she's become so incredible. After today, the Battle Alliance will become even more famous because of you." Xiao Feng, seeing Chi-Chi not only return safely but becoming so mighty, you must be delirious with joy. "Ah!" Yun Feng roared out as he rushed towards a place densely gathered with the Yin Huang Alliance's players. Boom! 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 The Yin Huang Alliance's army was continuously bombarded with explosions. Not only were their bodies incinerated, but their minds grew frightened as well. At this moment, Xiaoqi suddenly stopped as Ling gave a cry, and quickly turned and left. Below them, to the north, a large patch of black dots appeared and quickly rushed towards her. That was a crowd of flying pets, and all of them carried a marksman holding bows. At a glance, there were at least 1,000 of them. Xiaoqi immediately understood what was happening. Indeed, this was the only way to attack her with her so high in the air. The squadron of flying pets drew closer and closer, and when the closest ones were already 100 meters away, Xiaoqi did not seem worried at all. Instead, there was a red flush on her perfect face as she stretched out her right arm with a vermilion death pointed ahead of her, and red flame started to burn on top of the vermilion death. Vermilion bird's wings! Whoosh! The crimson-red flames burst out and took the shape of the vermilion bird. It flapped its wings as it flew towards the flying pets, and a faint bird's cry rang out. When they were about 100 meters away, the archers on the flying pets didn't even have time to prepare to attack when they suddenly saw a phoenix-shaped flame rushing towards them.
It instantly spanned the 100 meters distance, closing in on them extremely quickly. The blazing flames were like a ferocious beast, and as it passed through them, nearly 50 marksmen had no time even to cry out as they were devoured and fell with the pets to the ground.
What? Impossible. This is impossible. How can she attack from such a distance?
The binoculars the Flame Emperor held fell to the ground as he stared with wide eyes and yelled out. He simply couldn't accept what he had just seen. At most, his fire magic's range was 50% greater than that of average players. He was completely confident that he was China's #1 mage. However, he had just seen Xiao attack from nearly 100 meters away. Even his strongest fire magic wouldn't come close.
Impossible? Huh. Do you think we're both seeing things?
Long Tianyan coldly replied. At this moment, a piercing bird's cry sounded from a distance. When they heard this cry, Long Tianyan's hands suddenly trembled as his eyes widened. When he heard the bird's call, he had seen the flying pets who were chasing after Xiao fall like rocks and crash into the army below. 1 second, a dark wave of flying pets filled the sky, and in the next second, there was not a single one of them left. All of them had fallen. In Ling's current state, although she couldn't attack players, she was still able to attack pets. With her sovereign grade, a mighty cry from her was not something these flying pets, who were like trash in front of her, could contend with. Before Ling, they were like a group of rats which met the king of the jungle. Under a roar from the king of the jungle, apart from tremble, they couldn't do anything at all. Xiao continued to rain down balls of flame, resulting in countless pitiful cries. The Yin Huang Alliance had spent much time transferring the flying pets and had gathered 1,000 of their best marksmen. Yet, Xiao and Ling had completely destroyed them with a single attack and a single cry, turning all that effort into a joke. Long Tianyan tightly gripped his fists together, making a cracking sound as he viciously spat.
Bring out the cloud-piercing crossbow. What? The cloud-piercing crossbow?
Flame Shadow was given a big fright as he hurriedly replied.
But isn't that the secret weapon to be used against Ling Chen? If we reveal it now, I said to bring out the cloud-piercing crossbow. Are you deaf? All right. Team 3, you have 1 minute to prepare the cloud-piercing crossbow. The target is the girl in the sky using fire magic.
After Flame Shadow gave this order, a 10 meters long, 10 meters wide, metallic crossbow chariot was slowly pushed out. On top of the chariot was a gigantic dark gray crossbow. It was called the cloud-piercing crossbow because it was powerful enough to pierce through clouds. 2 months ago, one of the Yin Huang Alliance's elite groups had obtained the cloud-piercing crossbow's blueprints at a mysterious ruin 2 months ago. They had passed it to the Azure Dragon City's best blacksmiths and expended large amounts of money and time. After many failures, they finally created this terrifying killing machine. The cloud-piercing crossbow was not a standard archer's weapon, but an attack item. Its grade was close to Heaven's End, and it was the most powerful attack item possessed by players at the current stage of the game. It weighed more than 1 ton, and its draw weight was even more monstrous. It required at least 30 players, who each had more than 300 strength to pull it. The heavy crossbow bolt shot by the cloud-piercing crossbow could reach up to 1,000 meters away. Of course, to release such power, the crossbow bolts were not ordinary either. The crossbow bolts weighed 50 kilograms, and were made from star-cloud chilling iron. A single arrow was worth 1 million gold. The cloud-piercing crossbow was one of the Yin Huang Alliance's secrets, and was Long Tianyan's ultimate weapon against Ling Chen. He was confident that with the cloud-piercing crossbow's might, he would be able to kill Ling Chen from 1,000 meters away. However, Ling Chen had not appeared today while Xiao had, forcing Long Tianyan to use this secret weapon early. The heavy crossbow bolt was loaded onto the cloud-piercing crossbow, and 30 elite warriors, who had completed their second profession upgrade, pulled the drawstring. As a metallic creaking sound was heard, the cloud-piercing crossbow slowly turned, until it finally accurately pointed toward Xiao. Whoosh! The cloud-piercing bow fired, and the massive recoil caused the metal chariot to be launched back, sending the 30 elite warriors flying. In every corner of the battlefield, everyone heard an incredibly piercing sound. The crossbow bolt broke through the air, traveling extremely quickly, and traversing 1,000 meters in an instant. Everyone raised their heads, watching as that terrifying black crossbow bolt shot toward Xiao. Bang! The crossbow bolt was simply too fast, and by the time Xiao noticed it, it was already too late. She was hit directly in the chest by the crossbow bolt, and the massive impact caused her to fall from Ling's back, minus 160,000. The massive damage was enough to kill Xiao 10 times over. She was sent flying nearly 100 meters by the crossbow bolt, and she fell powerlessly down.
Ah! Chi!
Meng Xian cried out in shock and horror as her eyes trembled, her heart falling into a deep abyss.
Just then, what happened?
Li Xiaoshui was also completely dumbfounded. The Yin Huang Alliance actually had such a fearsome weapon. In the distance, the faces of the bosses of the large guilds went pale as they stared in shock. Seeing the crossbow bolt hit Xiao, they felt as if they, themselves, had been hit in the heart. Every guild had their trump cards, and they were no exception. However, the Yin Huang Alliance's secret weapon was something they could not even imagine. That arrows seemed to come from beyond where the eye could see, and the sound of the air being torn told them it would be able even to destroy the sturdy gates of a city. During a large war, a single crossbow bolt would be able to pierce through anything within 1,000 meters. Who could block such a thing? This crossbow bolt killed the Yin Huang Alliance's greatest enemy in this battle, and gave a warning to anyone who had any ideas against them. Watching Xiao being pierced by the crossbow bolt, Long Tianyun smirked as he said in a low voice,
"The Yin Huang Alliance hasn't displayed its might in a while, and some people seem to have forgotten how terrifying the Yin Huang Alliance is, HM?"
Long Tianyun suddenly stopped speaking as he frowned. As countless people watched, Xiao's falling body suddenly burned with a crimson-red flame. The fire completely covered Xiao's body, and her descent began to slow. She eventually floated in the air. Ling chased over, and once again put Xiao, wrapped in flames, on her back. In that instant, the flames on Xiao's body disappeared. She raised her, Vermilion Death, as she continued to attack, sending the dumbstruck Yin Huang Alliance players into a fire purgatory. After inheriting the Vermilion Bird's flames, how could Xiao not possess the Nirvana flames? Moreover, because Xiao's life force couldn't compare to that of the Vermilion Birds, a mysterious god-grade beast, the amount of Nirvana flames she required for a resurrection was incredibly minuscule. The Vermilion Bird could only use its Nirvana flames once in its lifetime, but Xiao could use it 9 times every day. In other words, if the Yin Huang Alliance truly wanted to kill Xiao, they would have to kill her 10 times within a day.
Revival?
Long Tianyun's expression became savage. The cloud-piercing crossbow, which he wanted to use to show the Yin Huang Alliance's might, had not been able to kill Xiao, making him utterly furious. He roared,
"Again! I want her dead!"
A second crossbow bolt was loaded onto the cloud-piercing crossbow. Because of how unique the crossbow bolts were, the Yin Huang Alliance only had 12 of them. Every use was a significant expenditure. Flame Shadow watched in pain as 30 elite warriors drew the drawstring back. Whoosh! This sound was even greater than the one before, causing everyone to look up simultaneously. The crossbow bolt's speed was absolutely monstrous, and despite being nearly 1,000 meters away, let alone Xiao, even Ling was unable to react in time. She was unable to evade it all as an explosion-like sound rang out, and Xiao was once again hit. She was sent flying by the crossbow bolt, and her HP immediately vanished. Countless cries of shock and worry sounded out as Long Tianyun coldly laughed. Revival items were incredibly rare, but they definitely existed. He was sure that Xiao had used some sort of revival item before. However, not only were they rare, they had strict usage conditions. No matter what item it was, a person could only use one of those items every day at most. Just as he laughed, his face froze. Xiaoqi's body once again started to burn with crimson-red flames, and within the nirvana flames, Xiaoqi stood up on top of Ling's back, with numerous looks of disbelief focused on her. If it were the Xiaoqi from before, she would have felt quite nervous at being looked at like this. However, with the Vermilion Bird's power, as well as the Vermilion Bird's soul's might and the air of a monarch, she remained remarkably calm. Only her large eyes shone with an unnatural red glow. After her second revival, she did not continue to launch her normal attacks, but silently looked beneath her as she slowly lifted the Vermilion Death. Inheritor of my power, you must remember that fire is the most vibrant and the most explosive element. Those who inherit the power of flames will feel their personalities become more explosive and will become easily angered. However, do not try to suppress your fury, because your fury will allow the flames within you to become more vibrant and the might of your flames to become more powerful. When your fury reaches the extreme, you can use my Vermilion Bird clan's most powerful skill, Dazzling Red Lotus. Although Dazzling Red Lotus can't compare to the Golden Crow's heavenly wrath of the Nine Suns, it's more powerful than the Phoenix clan's world-burning heavenly flames. Once Dazzling Red Lotus starts burning, it will cause everything within 1,000 miles to be incinerated. Although you've inherited my flames, it hasn't been very long, and your power is not yet stable. Because of your body's limitations, I was only able to give enough power to activate a small Dazzling Red Lotus. However, even that will cause unimaginable results. As such, before you reach LV90, even if you feel incredibly furious, don't try to use Dazzling Red Lotus. Moreover, the Dazzling Red Lotus doesn't differentiate between allies and foes, and it can burn even the current you. Although the Vermilion Bird's battle gown will protect you, it will still harm your innocent friends. Remember my words. The Vermilion Bird's words echoed in Xiaoqi's mind, then became hazy and vanished. Beneath her, Ling seemed to detect something and beat her wings as she gave a long cry. Xiaoqi didn't notice any of this. Her mind was becoming hotter and hotter as her consciousness spread to 100 meters away, 1,000 meters away, 10,000 meters away. The Yin Huang Alliance's army. Long Tianyun, who was far away to the south of the Azure Forest village. The Disillusion Alliance and Snow Moon Lulon, who were desperately fighting. Meng Xian, Li Xiaoshui and Mu Bingyao, who were north of the new city. The silently recovering Sword Emperor. She could see all of them. No one knew this moment would become the starting point of a legend. Arouse the Flame Empress fury, 1,000,000 troops to bury. The burning fire covered Xiaoqi's body and grew faster and faster. At the same time, a wave of heat quickly spread out from her. The players below Xiaoqi all stopped fighting and raised their heads as they watched the expanding ball of crimson-red flames. The air around them had suddenly become incredibly hot. The heat was simply blistering, causing their skin to go red. What's going on? The sudden rise in temperature made it difficult for Yunfeng to breathe. He took a deep breath, and the hot air made his organs feel like they were boiling. What was even worse was the temperature was still quickly rising every second. Around them, no matter if it was the Yin Huang Alliance's players or the defenders, all of them started to panic due to the unbearable heat as they watched the flame in the sky. They all began to retreat in fear, trying to get as far away as possible. They had been lost in their bloodlust and disregarded their own lives. However, the pain of being burned to death was worse than death at the hands of their enemies. As the temperature continued to rise, the area that was affected also increased. More and more players started to panic, and more than half of them started to stare up at Xiao. Every person knew this girl in the flaming gown was the source of this terrifying heat. As they felt themselves suffocating from the heat, they all knew that this heat was most likely preparing for something even more terrifying.
What's going on over there?
Seeing the strange reactions coming from the center of the battlefield, Long Tianyun frowned.
From the information we received, that region has become incredibly hot, to the point that it's unbearable. Everyone there feels like they're being roasted in an oven.
Flame Shadow quickly replied.
Hot?
Long Tianyun looked up at Xiao as he coldly harrumphed.
Looks like she's going to use some big move. Tell everyone there to disperse. Based on how strong her normal attacks are, if she uses an ultimate skill, it might cause hundreds, if not thousands, of deaths. Thousands? How could there be such powerful fire magic?
Song Yun said hatefully.
Just because you haven't seen it before doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Moreover, with how densely gathered the players are in the center of the battlefield, if she uses an AoE ultimate skill, it's likely she will be able to kill at least 1,000 people. Flame Shadow, prepare 3 crossbow bolts. Since Ling Tian hasn't appeared, we'll give this gift to her. I'm determined to kill this strange little girl today.
Caw! After giving a loud cry, Shi Ling suddenly left Xiao and flew towards the south. Without Shi Ling, with the flames around her body, Xiao remained in the air without falling. Shi Ling quickly left, then dived towards Yunfeng within the crowd. Yunfeng only felt a gust of heat, and before he had realized what was happening, he was lifted up by Shi Ling into the sky as they flew towards the south. After reaching Meng and Li Xiaoshui, Shi Ling dropped the bewildered Yunfeng as she landed in front of them, anxiously looking at Xiao in the air. By now, no one could stop Xiao. Under such circumstances, Shi Ling couldn't protect everyone, so she did her best to protect the people who she knew.
What's going on? What's Chi doing?
Yunfeng crawled up from the ground as he breathed raggedly.
Shi Ling, what's happening to Chi?
Meng worriedly asked. Shi Ling did not reply. She spread out her crimson-golden wings as a semi-spherical red barrier formed. It spread out and covered Yunfeng, Meng, Li Xiaoshui, Mu Bingyao, as well as the Silent Sword Emperor, who was 10 steps away. At this moment, the sound of the air being torn apart resonated as 3 crossbow bolts shot towards Xiao. By the time she saw them, the dark gray arrows were less than 10 meters away from Xiao, and a surprised awe sounded out from Meng's mouth. SS. The 3 crossbow bolts all seemed to hit Xiao. However, the result this time was completely different than before. The crossbow bolts didn't pass through her body and continue flying, nor was Xiao sent flying, and there weren't any damaged figures. Xiao, surrounded by the flames, continued to hover in the air, while the crossbow bolts strangely disappeared the instant they touched her body. Anything that touched the unbelievably hot vermilion bird's origin flames would be instantly incinerated. Long Tianyun, who had been waiting for Xiao to be killed again, was completely dumbfounded. In that instant, he thought there was something wrong with his eyes. At this moment, an incredibly loud bird's cry sounded out. They were evidently more than 10 miles apart from each other, and yet it sounded like it was coming from right next to his ears, causing his body to tremble. A red light appeared above Xiao as a gigantic red shadow suddenly appeared. It had 2 wings and looked beautiful and majestic, giving off an overwhelming sense of might. It was the image of a bird, and it had a phoenix-like head, eagle-like claws, snake-like neck and phoenix-like tail feathers. It was covered in crimson-red feathers, which all burned with an intense flame. It was evidently the vermilion bird's phantasm. The image was 1,000 meters long, and it gave a majestic cry, flapping its wings as it slowly faded and disappeared. Although it had only appeared for a brief instant, it made a lasting impression in every person's mind. The moment the vermilion bird's phantasm disappeared, the flames around Xiaoqi's body suddenly flooded upwards, then began to fall around her, looking like a blossoming flower. When it had fully blossomed, it looked as if there was a flaming lotus in the sky with Xiaoqi at the center. This incredibly beautiful scene made the onlookers forget to breathe, and all of them looked up with their mouths wide open as they stared at the flaming lotus. They even forgot about the rising heat. Within their vision, there was only a single layer of petals, which contained 9 individual petals. A second layer then blossomed, followed by a third, a fourth, and a fifth. With every extra layer that blossomed, the flaming lotus doubled in size. In the end, it had grown from a small lotus into one that covered the entire sky. Through the binoculars, Long Tianyun saw the flaming lotus appear, and the battlefield fell silent. However, no one noticed this terrifying silence, because the flaming lotus drew their attention in the sky. When the flaming lotus was all he could see through the binoculars, he put them away and suddenly found that the flaming lotus petals were right in front of him. The binoculars in his hands fell to the ground as Long Tianyun's eyes widened in fear and shock, causing him to stumble backward. He was 10 miles away from the battlefield and was definitely safe. Even if someone tried to approach him here, they would be stopped by countless Yanhuang Alliance players. He never thought the flaming lotus would extend here. Long Tianyun felt no fear when he was killed by the Sword Emperor because he didn't care about his level, nor did he care about dying. However, currently, he felt absolutely terrified. This scene, which surpassed anything he had seen before, completely destroyed any mental defense he had, and he fell to the ground as an incredibly hot heat wave rushed towards him. As the flaming petals spread out over him, he could hear himself screaming in fear. The flaming lotus was now fully formed, and its petals stretched from the Azure Forest village to in front of the new city and spanned 20 miles. All of the Yin Huang Alliance, Disillusion Alliance, and Snow Moon Lowlands players were underneath the gigantic, flaming lotus. It only took the flaming lotus, from beginning to end, a few seconds to grow. Finally, the red lotus disappeared as every part of the red lotus became crimson-red flames as it began to burn mercilessly. The beautiful, dreamlike red lotus disappeared, and replacing it was a sea of flames that spanned 20 miles. At the center, the flames were hundreds of meters tall, as if they wished to break through the heavens. In front of the new city, Yun Feng, Yun Meng Xian, Li Xiaoshui, and Mu Bingyao's expressions froze as they looked at the sea of flames around them. No matter if it was in front, to their sides, or above them, there were only intense flames and nothing else. They could no longer see any people because the sea of flames devoured all of them. Yet, there were pitiful cries. Under the Vermilion Bird clan's most powerful skill, the Dazzling Red Lotus, the weak players didn't even have time to cry out before they were completely obliterated. Around them, the red barrier that Ling put up completely separated them from the flames and heat, preventing them from taking any damage. Within the Dazzling Red Lotus range, only they had survived. Everyone else was burnt to a crisp. The flames burned for more than 10 minutes, and they stared in shock for more than 10 minutes, during which no one spoke. Apart from the sound of the flames burning, there was no other sound. When the wind blew, and the flames died down, at a glance, there was not a single person there. The sea of players which had extended for nearly 10 miles had completely disappeared, and not even corpses were left. The equipment that the players had dropped and filled the ground was also gone. The vast grassy plains had also disappeared, replaced by a large area of scorched earth, and white smoke billowed everywhere. The ground had even sunk down a bit. Everything was gone. There were no traces of battle on the battlefield that had been extremely chaotic just 10 minutes ago. It was as if they had been transported into a different world within that red light. Added together, there were more than 2 million players from the Yin Huang Alliance, Disillusion Alliance, and Snow Moon Luan, and they were all dead. 2 million players, all of them. There had never been such casualties in all of China's history before.
Am I dreaming?
Yun Feng muttered as he blankly stared in front of him. No one replied. Even Li Xiao, who was able to maintain her cool in all circumstances, was so shocked that 2 million players had been simultaneously insta-killed that she lost her ability to think. South of the Forgotten Continent, Vermilion Bird City, Mayor's residence. The Vermilion Bird's mayor was wearing a red robe, with a red crown on his head. His face was quite red, and the hair on his temples stood up. Out of the Azure Dragon, White Tiger, Vermilion Bird, and Black Turtle cities, the Vermilion Bird's mayor was the strongest. His control over fire elementals was rumored to have already reached the peak, and he was the only one of the 4 mayors of the main cities who had reached the mysterious god grade. Overall, he was one of the 5 strongest humans in the Forgotten Continent. Adding to his fiery personality, and that he was easily enraged and was unstoppable when he was angry, all of his subordinates were extremely subdued in front of him, and didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Currently, he had his hands behind his back as he anxiously paced back and forth within the hall. The temperature at the lava purgatory had been rapidly decreasing, and that was where the Vermilion Bird resided. Guesses that the Vermilion Bird had left, or even died, caused the residents' hearts to become extremely heavy and made the atmosphere within the Vermilion Bird City quite tense. The Vermilion Bird was the Vermilion Bird City's guardian beast, and was a being that was worshipped by the humans in the south. If the Vermilion Bird truly died, they would receive a massive blow. In fact, to them, it would feel as if the sky was falling, and the city would fall into chaos and disorder for a long time. Facing the lava purgatory's decrease in temperature, the Vermilion Bird's mayor didn't know what to do. Although he had personally appeared, he was unable to calm the residents down. Today, he received a message from the Vermilion Bird, and when he saw it, he was completely dumbstruck.
Are reporting to Lord Mayor.
A middle-aged man wearing a red mage's robe appeared in a flash as he knelt down on a single knee in front of the Vermilion Bird's mayor. He hurriedly spoke.
1 minute ago, the Vermilion Bird's phantasm appeared towards the north. It only appeared for a moment, then disappeared.
The Vermilion Bird's mayor's body trembled as he quickly turned around.
Are you absolutely sure? We are 100% sure. I saw it myself. There are thousands of residents who can bear witness. We don't dare to lie regarding the Vermilion Bird. Good. Ha ha ha.
The Vermilion Bird's mayor's anxiety disappeared as he started to laugh loudly.
Very good. Immediately send people north and find out exactly where the Vermilion Bird's phantasm has appeared. No. Immediately prepare the Blaze Cult. This mayor will personally go himself. That's the Vermilion Bird's sole phantasm and can only appear on the Vermilion Bird's holy maiden.
Also, immediately tell the entire city that the Vermilion Bird has perished, but its power has not perished. Instead, it has been inherited by a human. This is the Vermilion Bird's great blessing on mankind. The human that inherited the Vermilion Bird's power is the holy maiden chosen by the Vermilion Bird itself. As long as we can receive the recognition of the Vermilion Bird's holy maiden, she can give us blessings and protection, much more than the Vermilion Bird itself.
The Vermilion Bird City's north gates were thrown open, and the Vermilion Bird's mayor, who had not stepped out of the Vermilion Bird City in tens of years, rode out towards the north. Behind him, hundreds of high-grade flame guards followed behind him. At the same time, news of the Vermilion Bird's holy maiden spread like a wild wind around the entire Vermilion Bird city. The tense and fearful atmosphere instantly became as vibrant and joyous as fire. The final tongues of fire disappeared, leaving behind black, burnt ground. At a glance, there was not a single bit of green anymore. Ling retracted her wings, and the red barrier of light disappeared. She flapped her wings and quickly flew forwards. Above in the sky, the flames around Xiao's body had disappeared, and she slowly fell down. Just as she was about to hit the ground, she was caught by Ling and brought over to Yunming Xian and the others. Ha ha! I'm back. Xiao jumped off Ling's back and proudly stood in front of the rest of them. Xiao was still Xiao. She was wearing a beautiful and eye-catching red battle gown, and her lovely face and eyes were full of spirit. Looking at the current Xiao, all of the people revealed a complicated expression. It was as if they were no longer seeing the girl they were incredibly familiar with, but a heavenly guest. Eh? Why are you all looking at me like that? Xiao felt quite strange being looked at like that, and she shrunk back her neck. Is there something weird about my body? Princess Chi, do you know what you just did? Li Xiaoshui took a deep breath as she calmly asked. Why, yeah. Chi, do you know what you just did? Evidently, Yun Feng was not as calm as Li Xiaoshui, and his voice trembled. The red lotus he had just seen was the most shocking, most beautiful, and the most unbelievable scene he had ever seen in his entire life. Even now, his mind was still hazy, and he was unable to believe what had just happened. Of course I know. Xiao blinked as she laughed. I accidentally used fire and burned them all to death. However, Xiao apologetically lowered her head. The attack just then couldn't distinguish between friend and foe, and I was unable to control it, so I ended up killing our friends from the Disillusion Alliance and Snow Moon Luan as well. Haha, that's not a big issue. Li Xiaoshui laughed and shook her head. The other side had lost close to 2 million players, while they had lost around 100,000. Trading 100,000 for 2 million, could there be a better deal? You destroyed 2 million players with a single attack. Princess Chi, do you understand the magnitude of that? That's a number that could only appear in a legend. You created a real legend. A legend that should, by reason, be impossible. She was unable to imagine just how much of an impact this would bring to the rest of the world. Chi, during that period of time, just what did you experience? Your attack was so powerful that I can't even describe it. Yunming Xian spoke emotionally as she walked forwards. Xiao's smile was as beautiful as a flower. As the instigator of all of this, she was extremely calm and wasn't shocked or scared by how powerful she was. After obtaining the Vermilion Bird's power, she also gained a portion of the Vermilion Bird's soul. In the Vermilion Bird's eyes, that sort of attack was quite ordinary. She giggled as she spoke. Hee, it's nothing really. They had so many people, so we definitely wouldn't have been able to beat them. As such, I could only do what I did just then to kill them all. Although they can immediately return here, it'll take them a long time to prepare again, because that fire burned away all of their equipment. As she spoke, Xiao's voice suddenly paused, and her bright eyes became hazy. Her body swayed as she fell backward. Chi. Yunming Xian cried out and hurriedly caught Xiao. Chi, are you all right? Everyone else gathered around and looked at her in concern. Xiao's eyes were half closed, and she did not have the strength to keep them fully open. Hearing Yunming Xian's voice, she moved her lips as she mumbled, I feel a bit dizzy, and I don't have any more strength in my body. Woo! I shouldn't have used that skill. The Vermilion Bird's origin flames. Need to sleep for a while. Maybe for a long time. Ling. Go and find Big Brother Ling Tian, and quickly bring him here.
Big brother Ling Tian will definitely defeat them.
Xiao Qi's eyes weakly closed as she stopped speaking.
Xiao Qi breathed peacefully, as the tip of her nose and her eyelashes slightly trembled with each breath. She seemed to be having a good sleep, and there appeared to be nothing wrong with her. Yun Meng Xian and Li Xiaoshui leaned Xiao Qi's body against the wall of vines, letting her sit there peacefully. The side effects of forcefully using her power had manifested, falling asleep for a long time. This sort of side effect of any other skill would be an incredibly cruel one. After falling asleep, one would be left entirely defenseless. However, in comparison to that terrifying ability to kill 2 million people, this sort of big side effect seemed negligible. Chi, you're so amazing. Not only did you return safely, but you also gave us such a huge surprise. I can only imagine how hard you worked for Heart's dream to return.
Yun Meng Xian softly spoke as she stood next to Xiao Qi.
Chi, have a good sleep, and leave the rest to us. We'll definitely protect the new city. Ling, please go and find Ling Tian and bring him here. I'm sure you'll be able to find him.
After receiving instructions from Xiao Qi and Yun Meng Xian, Ling flapped her wings and rose into the sky. After circling them for a bit, she flew towards the west and quickly disappeared from their vision. Xiao Qi. Li Xiaoshui had long since known of this name, but had never paid it much mind. However, at this moment, she stared at that girl until she committed her fully to memory. This was because the name was about to send the entire virtual world into a frenzy and become a synonym for a legend. After a while, she turned around and yelled to Yun Feng.
Yun Feng, the Yin Huang Alliance will be back soon. Immediately gather your Disillusion Alliance and tell them to hurry and rush back here.
This Yun Feng, who was holding his communication device, had a strange expression on his face. He looked as if he wanted to laugh and cry, and after a while, his face twitched as he replied.
Just then, Chi wasn't joking. Their equipment, their gear, all disappeared.
At the Azure Dragon City's central square, countless figures suddenly appeared at the revival point in a flash of light. After the light dissipated, the vast Azure Dragon City's central square became incredibly crowded, with people gathered everywhere. Even an ant wouldn't be able to squeeze out. If they had all died normally, this would not have been a big deal. After all, with how many players there were in China, the Azure Dragon City's central square was often clogged with people. However, none of the men had any clothes on, and the women only had underwear made of coarse cloth. The earth-shattering scene of 2 million naked men and semi-naked women almost blinded many people's eyes within the central square. The entirety of the Azure Dragon City's central square, as well as all media and forums, went crazy. Numerous news broadcasts, videos, and forum threads started to flood social media.
Millions of streaking males appear at the Azure Dragon City's central square. This world's too crazy. The entire Yin Huang Alliance streaks together. Are they going against the heavens? Today's top news: the Naked Yin Huang Alliance. The Yin Huang Alliance's Alliance Master's nude photos, shared at the risk of death. My eyes have been blinded. The Yin Huang Alliance's Alliance Master's dong is only 3 centimeters long. Of course, I have pictures. Chinese men's average length. Thank you to the Yin Huang Alliance's million males for giving a perfect sample size. Discussion of Long Tian Yun's dong. Hashtag $%.
Xiao Qi, indeed, had not been joking. The Vermilion Bird clan's ultimate skill destroyed everything, not just life, the environment, items, and equipment. The players who were within range not only instantly died, but their equipment was also burnt to ash. No matter if it was their weapons, jewelry, outer clothes, underwear. All of it was entirely obliterated. However, for the protection of females, unless they were willing, they were covered with underwear made of coarse cloth when appearing naked in a public place. Of course,
Non-public places did not count. As for males, they didn't have this sort of treatment.